Before the pyramids pierced the skies, before the first kings engraved their names in stone, there may have been something more, something older, something forgotten still. Under the oceans, buried under jungles, and hidden in the depths of the mountains, the whispers of lost worlds persist. Fragments of civilizations that disappeared long before written history had begun. We call them pre-fluvios. But their true names, their stories, their gods are but shadows. Their ruins defy all explanation. Their technologies seem out of place, their legends terrifying. What kind of people thrived before flood myths resonated throughout ancient cultures? Who built the temples now lost at sea? Why do so many stories about the origins speak of cataclysm, giants, divine punishments? This is not the story of Atlantis. This is the story of what may have existed prior to Atlantis. So sit down, relax, and immerse yourself in the most chilling and mind-blowing stories of pre-flood civilizations. They are not myths, they're possibly memories. And they're much more terrifying than we have dared imagine. High in the remote mountain ranges of the Middle East, where rugged cliffs pierce the sky and valleys seem sculpted by forgotten hands, lies a region that has long whispered its secrets to those who listen carefully. They are lands of ancient stone and wind, where time folds in on itself and myth walks with history. For millennia, they have attracted the attention of poets, prophets, and scholars. But among the oldest and most enigmatic accounts that have been passed down from this place is one that continues to baffle. The story of the Watchers. The Book of Enoch, a non-canonical Jewish text written over 2,000 years ago, offers one of the most detailed accounts of these beings. It speaks of a group of celestial entities known as the Watchers, who descended to Earth in an era prior to the Great Flood. According to the text, their domain was not only physical, but spiritual, a liminal space between the earthly and divine. They were sent to observe humanity, to guide it from afar. But they did not keep their distance. Instead, they descended. The story tells that 200 Watchers descended on Mount Hermon, an imposing peak stretching along the borders of present-day Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. In the silence of its snowy ridges and mist-shrouded slopes, they made a pact, an oath to take human wives, live among men, and share forbidden knowledge. The Book of Enoch describes this moment as both wonderful and tragic. It was the beginning of a fracture, a rupture in the cosmos order. But why Mount Hermon? And why here? The mountain has been sacred for millennia. In the Canaanite tradition, it was known as the abode of gods. Even today, remains of ancient temples cling to its summit, their stones worn by wind and time. They are not great monuments, but their presence is disturbing. Solitary altars to forgotten powers that still align with celestial paths. From certain strategic points, the stars seem lower here, as if the sky itself watched. Archaeological investigations have uncovered layers of occupation dating to the Neolithic. Fragments of ceramics, burial sites, and rudimentary inscriptions point to a continuous human presence, albeit silent. However, none of these findings explain the mountain's mythical weight. Local legends, both Christian and Islamic, echo the idea of divine encounters here. Pilgrims speak of strange lights on the summit, of voices carried on the wind. Even military personnel stationed nearby have reported unexplained sightings, glowing orbs, erratic weather, profound unease. Is it just the power of a story rooted deeply in our collective memory? Or could there be something more? The story of the Watchers, preserved in Enochian literature and later reflected in Gnostic, Islamic, and esoteric traditions, becomes stranger when we examine its influence. According to the text, these beings taught humanity secrets of heaven and earth. They revealed metallurgy, the manufacture of weapons, enchantments, and signs of the stars. Some traditions attribute to them the very origin of civilization, transmitting fragments of divine knowledge that accelerated human development. But there was a cost. It was said that children of Watchers and human consorts were giants. Nephilim, beings of immense size and strength whose presence corrupted the world. Violence spread. knowledge became dangerous. The earth groaned under its weight. And so, according to myth, the Great Flood was sent as purification, a restart. These are not small ideas. They suggest that long before our first empires arose, there may have existed a civilization, or something similar, born not only of humans, but of encounter with the other. Of course, many scholars see the Book of Enoch as symbolic, an allegory of forbidden knowledge, limits crossed, and order undone. The Watchers may be metaphors for priest-kings or wise men whose wisdom became too dangerous. The Nephilim could be echoes of an ancient race now lost to time, or simply mythological substitutes for chaos that follows power without control. But not everyone agrees. Some fringe researchers, based on the ancient astronaut theory, suggest that the Watchers were not angels or spirits, but beings from elsewhere, perhaps another world or dimension. Their descent, they argue, was not metaphorical, but literal. The knowledge they shared, so strangely advanced for its time, could be proof of contact with superior intelligence. From this point of view, Mount Hermon becomes a kind of ancient landing site, an entry point between realms. It is no coincidence, they say, that the mountain is located near the 33rd North Parallel, a line long associated with mystery, power, and significant historical events. Skeptics dismiss these claims as pseudoscience, pointing to a lack of solid evidence and the dangers of interpreting ancient texts with modern lenses. And yet, the story endures. Why does it persist across different cultures? Why does the idea of divine beings descending, mixing with humans, and bringing knowledge that transforms the world resonate in so many traditions? From the Sumerian Anunnaki to the Greek Titans, from the Hindu Devas to the Mesoamerican sky gods? Could they all be accessing the same forgotten memory? And what about Mount Hermon? What remains buried under its stones or hidden within its caves? The domain of the Watchers is not just a tale. It is a mirror, a reflection of our deepest fears and desires. To be guided, to be elevated, but also to be warned. That some knowledge has a price. That not all ascents lead to enlightenment, and not all descents are benign. We may never know what really happened on that ancient mountain, whether it was myth, metaphor, or memory. But the winds keep whispering there, and the silence keeps watching. So let's continue. There are more domains to discover, more echoes to follow. Let's delve into the forgotten world of the pre-flood era, leaving behind the chilling echoes of the Watchers' domain. Our path meanders east toward the windswept passes of Central Asia. Here, where the land stretches uninterrupted to the horizon, where sky and earth seem to merge into an infinite silence, something stirs beneath the surface of memory. A whisper of a forgotten people, a great power, a name that resurfaces again and again in obscure manuscripts, in forbidden maps, in half-erased chronicles. Tartaria. At first glance, the word seems like an invention, an echo of the medieval imagination, a kingdom too vast, too grandiose, too advanced to fit perfectly into our historical frameworks. But as you delve deeper, something strange begins to emerge. For centuries, maps printed in Europe and Asia labeled vast expanses of territory as Tartaria, sometimes described as a loose confederation, others as a powerful empire. Tartaria was believed to stretch from the Ural Mountains to the confines of the Pacific, from Siberia to the deserts of Persia. But who were the Tartars, and why did they disappear so abruptly from our historical records? One of the first mentions of Tartaria appears in Renaissance cartography, often adorned with warnings about unknown peoples and strange creatures. Some maps refer to Great Tartary, a sovereign land of immense scope. Others mark it with cryptic annotations. Here dwell giants, city of ancients, land of cyclopean ruins. As the age of discoveries progressed, these territories remained largely inaccessible to European scholars. Few dare travel so far north, and even fewer returned. But long before these maps, long before modern history tried to draw borders and erase anomalies, the ancient peoples of this region left clues. Enormous mounds of earth, strange megalithic ruins, and architectural fragments scattered across the steppes. Some of these structures, now worn by centuries of frost and wind, seem to defy the technological capabilities of known nomadic cultures. With stones too heavy to move without modern cranes, intricate geometric alignments with the stars, and complex underground systems whose original purpose remains unclear. Were they the work of later groups, the Scythians, the Huns, the Mongols, or do they belong to an older layer of human history, one that we still do not understand? In recent years, fringe theorists have revived the idea of a vast Tartarian civilization, which predates the flood myths found throughout the world. They point to architectural oddities in remote places, colossal structures with unparalleled craftsmanship, often attributed to more recent builders, but bearing the signature of an advanced design. Ornate ceilings in Siberian cathedrals, star-shaped fortresses aligned with perfect precision, basements buried under layers of sediment that suggest not decay, but a catastrophe. Could it be that Tartaria was not simply a medieval empire, but the vestige of something far older? A civilization that reached great heights of knowledge and engineering before the world was swept away by some global cataclysm. Conventional historians, of course, urge caution. The name Tartaria, they argue, was often a generic term used by Western cartographers to label lands that were little known. Many of the structures cited by alternative researchers have plausible chronologies dating to the Tsarist or post-Mongol eras. Flooded basements can be explained by changing river courses or poor urban planning. The apparent mysteries dissipate, they say, under closer examination. But some questions still remain. Why do so many maps from the 18th and 19th centuries continue to refer to Tartaria as an active political entity, even when it does not appear in contemporary diplomatic records? Why do the diaries of explorers from those centuries describe strange ruins and cities older than time? But those accounts are now largely forgotten or dismissed. And then there are the legends passed down silently from generation to generation in villages hidden in the Caucasus, the Alai Mountains, and the plains of Kazakhstan. Tales of tall, pale-skinned builders who tamed lightning and disappeared into the earth during a great flood, of music made of metal and air, of cities swallowed whole in a single night. Some researchers suggest that what we now call Tartaria could be a linguistic descendant of an older tradition, not an empire in the political sense, but a cultural memory fragmented among tribes and languages, a memory of a time when humanity knew more than it remembers, when the steppes were not a desert, but the center of something vast, luminous, and now completely lost. It is here, among the cold winds and shifting sands, that the mystery of the great Tartarian ancestors endures, not in a single image, but in a pattern of erased names, of misunderstood ruins, of stories that do not quite fit. The more you look, the more you get the feeling that something vital has been removed from our shared history. Was Tartaria simply a geopolitical label? Or does it point to a forgotten chapter of human civilization? One that stood before the seas rose, before the stars lost their meaning, before the flood restarted the world. And if it existed, if the ancestors of Tartaria really built wonders now buried or confused with more recent works, what did they know that we do not? What do they see coming? The steppes are silent. The ruins do not speak, but somewhere, under centuries of dust and denial, the truth awaits. Let us continue. The road darkens, and the echoes of the world before the flood grow stronger with each step. As the echoes of Tartaria fade into the wind-whipped silence of the steppes, our path turns north, far north, beyond the forests of Siberia, beyond the last vestiges of the ancient maps, towards a realm long shrouded in ice and myths. A land that few have seen, and even fewer have returned from unchanged. The Arctic. Here, in this realm of perpetual twilight and shifting glaciers, legend speaks of something almost unthinkable. A lost polar civilization, a world that was once warm, vibrant, and full of life, long before the Earth tilted before the Great Glaciation. Some call it Arctos. Others only know it as Hyperborea, Ultimathule, or the land beyond the north wind. Today, the Arctic is a world of extremes, hostile, icy, and inhospitable. But has it always been this way? Ancient Greek historians, such as Herodotus and Pindar, spoke of a distant land to the north where the sun barely set and where a noble people lived in peace for 1,000 years. These Hyperboreans were said to possess immeasurable wisdom and live in harmony with nature, oblivious to war and the passage of time. According to these first accounts, its civilization existed long before the rise of Egypt, before Babylon, even perhaps before the universal flood. At first, these claims seem like poetic inventions. But in the last century, indications have emerged that challenge our assumptions about the remote past. The ice cores from the Arctic, which go back tens of thousands of years, reveal periods of dramatic climatic instability. Brief intervals in which polar regions were temperate, even exuberant. Pollen samples extracted from the depths of the ice in Greenland and Antarctica suggest that in other times forests grew where now only snow survives. Could it be that these myths are distant memories of a real place now buried under centuries of ice? Some geologists point to the Pleistocene epoch, when the Earth's axis may have shifted during a cataclysmic event, plunging the Arctic, previously habitable, into sudden winter. Others propose more controversial ideas, such as that the North Pole was once located elsewhere and entire continents were displaced throughout geological time. According to this theory, the polar civilization was not just a metaphor, but a real society erased by planetary catastrophe. But if Arctos really existed, where are its ruins? That question continues to haunt explorers and theorists alike. Satellite images of certain Arctic regions have revealed enigmatic formations under the ice, circular structures, geometric alignments, and what some interpret as artificial ridges. Although many scientists warn that these could be natural formations, ice ridges, pressure faults, or simple geological coincidences, others are not so sure. An especially enigmatic case is in the archipelago of the land of Isef, a remote group of icy islands in the Russian Arctic. Here, strange megalithic stones have been found with shapes that seem intentional and architectural. Russian expeditions during the Soviet era documented these anomalies, but classified much of their findings. Were these simply military reconnaissance missions, or did they find something that should be hidden? Adding to this mystery is the recurring appearance of polar civilizations in esoteric traditions around the world. In Hindu cosmology, the mythical Mount Meru is said to be located in the center of the earth, surrounded by the lands of the gods. Some traditions place it near the pole. Norse legends speak of Asgard and the Bifrost Bridge, kingdoms said to be located in the far north, connected to our world by resplendent light. Tibetan texts refer to Shambhala, a sacred kingdom often associated with the polar axis, a place of supreme knowledge and ancient power hidden beyond reach. Even Plato, in his account of Atlantis, mentions a land located in front of the Pillars of Heracles. Perhaps not to the south, as most assume, but at the other end of the world, shrouded in time and ice? Could all these disparate accounts be fragments of collective memory? A civilization so ancient and far removed from our own that only its shadows remain in myths and symbols. Marginal researchers have long speculated about the possibility of a polar origin for civilization itself. According to this theory, Arctos, or its real-world equivalent, could have been the cradle of knowledge, the source from which ancient cultures inherited geometry, astronomy, and metallurgy. As the cataclysm approached, whether it was a flood, an ice age, or a shift of poles, its inhabitants fled south and became the founders of new civilizations in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica. But where is the evidence? Some point to the disturbing similarities between the world's oldest mythologies, the celestial gods who descend from the heavens, the bearers of knowledge who arrive by sea, the cultures that seem to appear already fully formed with calendars, writing, and architecture. Others point to the widespread reverence for the North as a sacred place in traditions ranging from the Celts to the Egyptians and the Hopi. Skeptics argue that these are coincidences, the result of cultural diffusion or the psychological need to imagine origins in a distant, unattainable place. They warn that theories about polar civilization often lack solid archaeological evidence and run the risk of falling into fantasy. And yet, the questions persist. Why do so many ancient sources describe a warm, inhabited north? Why do so many traditions fixate on a place of purity, knowledge, and light located beyond the Arctic polar circle? And what is hidden under the ice, under layers that we have not yet drilled in regions that no one can fully explore? The idea of a civilization that flourished at the top of the world before the flood seems impossible. And perhaps it is. But as our understanding of climatic history, geology, and myths continues to evolve, so does the possibility that something existed there, something we have forgotten or should never have remembered. So we follow the cold winds, delving into the silence that envelopes the world's oldest ice. What could still be hidden beneath? A myth, a people, a warning. Let's move on. The history of the world before the flood is just beginning to be revealed. From the icy mists of the polar north, our journey now heads south towards the heat, the water, and the echoes of another kind of forgotten greatness. Beneath the restless waves of the Pacific, in a realm once believed to be empty and remote, lies the whispered memory of a vast, powerful civilization. Its name does not appear on modern maps, nor is it engraved on surviving monuments. However, it appears time and again in the murmurs of ancient myths, in cryptic inscriptions, and in the dreams of submerged lands. This was the Empire of Pan. To contemplate the Pacific today is to contemplate the largest and deepest ocean on Earth, an infinite expanse that stretches from Asia to America. But in a distant past, some believe it was the home of a prosperous and highly advanced civilization, now lost beneath the waves. The name Pan is frequently associated with the term Mu, a legendary submerged continent first proposed in the 19th century by Augustus Le Plongeon, who claimed that Mayan inscriptions spoke of a distant land to the west, beyond the sea, where civilization began. Conventional archaeologists have long dismissed the idea of Mu as speculative fiction, an invention of Victorian mysticism. But others have found the pattern too widespread and deeply rooted in world folklore to ignore. Polynesian oral traditions speak of Hawaii, a mystical homeland from which their ancestors emerged. In Japan, legends speak of Nihonkai no Kuni, the land under the sea. And in some parts of Micronesia, stories still resonate of gods who once ruled from a chain of islands now submerged, devastated by a furious sky and rising waters. Could all these be fragments of a greater truth? A lost civilization that once ruled the Pacific Basin? The scattered islands of the Pacific, Easter Island, the Marquesas, the Solomon Islands, and others, hold clues that continue to baffle modern researchers. Let's take Nan Madol as an example. A vast megalithic complex built on coral reefs in Micronesia, composed of huge basalt pillars arranged into canals, platforms, and burial chambers. No one knows who built it. Local legends speak of witchcraft, of floating stones summoned from distant lands by forgotten rulers. The basalt weighs tons, and the quarry is kilometers away, with no clear method known by which it could have been transported. Was Nan Madol simply an isolated wonder or a surviving outpost of a larger empire now gone? According to fringe theorists, the Empire of Pan was not simply a regional kingdom. It was a planetary force, a maritime superpower that harnessed the rhythms of the tides and the stars, spreading knowledge, language, and architecture throughout the world long before the waters rose. From his point of view, Pan was a mother culture. Its emissaries reached the coasts of Mesoamerica, India, and Mesopotamia, sowing the seeds of civilization in the world's fertile crescent. Even more intriguing is the appearance of similar pyramidal structures in the Pacific Islands, stepped, truncated, and often aligned with solar and lunar cycles. These architectural echoes suggest not only a diffusion, but a common origin. Could they be the footprints of Pan? Skeptics, of course, argue that such similarities arise naturally, that human beings around the world, in responding to the same environmental pressures and spiritual impulses, independently arrived at similar solutions. But others wonder, why do so many of these sites, separated by thousands of kilometers, speak of a cataclysm, of a sudden flood? Why does the memory of a vanished land, often called by different names but sharing disturbingly similar characteristics, persist in isolated cultures throughout the Pacific? Geological evidence offers some tantalizing possibilities. During the last glacial maximum, sea level was more than 120 meters lower than today. The continental shelves that are now submerged would have been dry land. The Sunda Shelf, near Southeast Asia, the Sahul Shelf, near Australia, and the submerged Kermadec and Lower Howe rises may once have housed human settlements. Could these submerged lands have been part of the empire of Pan? Some researchers point to the Bimini Road, near the Bahamas, and the underwater terraces off Yonaguni, in Japan, both considered by alternative historians to be remnants of ancient cities. While conventional geologists attribute these formations to natural processes, others point to their unnatural symmetry, their sharp angles, and their staircase-like structures. Natural or not, their presence under the ocean raises uncomfortable questions. And then there are the linguistic anomalies, the common roots of words, the mythological archetypes, and the cultural motifs that link Polynesia with South America or Japan with Peru. Thor Heyerdahl sailed in the Kon-Tiki from Peru to the Polynesian islands to demonstrate that ancient transoceanic contact was at least possible. Could the builders of Pan have done the same, not as vagabonds, but as rulers? A particularly disturbing legend comes from Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, home to the enigmatic Moai statues. Oral tradition speaks of the Hanno Eep, a long-eared people who came from the sea bringing knowledge and construction methods unknown to the natives. They ruled, built, and eventually disappeared after a mysterious conflict. Were they survivors of a larger civilization seeking refuge in the last exposed fragments of their homeland? No one can say for sure. And yet, as we explore the depths of our oceans and map the seabed with greater precision, we continue to find anomalies. Straight lines stretching for kilometers, submerged ridges that appear artificial, lost structures hidden beneath the sediments. Is the empire of Pan waiting to be rediscovered? Or was it always a memory, a warning passed down from time before time? If Pan really existed, what caused its fall? Was it the flood of which global mythologies speak? A sudden tectonic convulsion? Or something more abstract, an internal collapse, a loss of balance between wisdom and knowledge? The Pacific remains silent. Its waves ceaselessly bathe what could be the bones of some forgotten empire. But somewhere under the corals and currents, the truth waits in darkness. Let us continue. The world before the flood still has stories to tell, if we listen. As we leave behind Pan's submerged legacy and delve into the silent confines of Earth's memory, we approach the most remote and desolate frontier of the planet, Antarctica. A continent shrouded in perpetual cold, surrounded by imposing glaciers and sealed under kilometers of ice. It is a place seemingly untouched by time, too inhospitable for life, too isolated for history. And yet, beneath its icy surface, some believe something extraordinary may be hidden. The remains of a city before the flood, built by unknown hands. Antarctica extends over more than 5 million square miles, larger than Europe and utterly alien in its stillness. Its ice sheets conceal 90% of the planet's fresh water and reach depths of over 2 miles. No trees grow here. There are no ancient ruins rising above ground. But what if the ruins are not above but below? The idea of an ancient city buried under Antarctica seems implausible at first. After all, science tells us that the continent has been covered by ice for millions of years. But the latest findings have begun to complicate this picture. Studies of ice cores and sediment layers reveal Antarctica has not always been frozen. Approximately 12,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the last glaciation, temperatures soared during a period known as the Younger Dryas. For a brief time on the geological scale, the continent may have had a temperate climate with rivers, forests, and perhaps human life. Satellite scans conducted by NASA and independent geophysical teams have identified strange anomalies under the ice. Geometric formations, large symmetrical ridges, and even what appear to be enormous dome-shaped structures. One of the most talked about sites is located near the Ellsworth Mountains, deep within Queen Maud Land, where radar images have captured patterns suggesting artificial architecture. Right angles, layered elevations, and an unusual uniformity in natural formations. For the scientific community, this data is intriguing but not conclusive. Most explanations point to subglacial volcanoes, faults, or unusual rock formations shaped by glacial movement. However, for others, these scans point to something far more disturbing. Theories about an ancient Antarctic civilization are nothing new. In the 16th century, long before Antarctica was officially discovered, Turkish Admiral Piri Reis compiled a map based on older sources. That map, preserved in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, shows the coast of what many believe is Antarctica without ice. According to scholars who have examined it, the map traces river deltas, inlets, and mountain ranges with surprising precision. But how could those details have been recorded centuries before modern exploration and, more importantly, before the ice formed? Some believe the map is a vestige of a much older cartographic tradition, passed down by civilizations prior to written history. Could the builders of this Antarctic city be the source of that ancestral knowledge? Could they have seen the sea freeze around them, their temples buried under the ice, while the surface world forgot them? Legends from distant cultures seem to echo this possibility. In Andean mythology, there is rumored to be a white land to the south ruled by ice gods who disappeared after some great catastrophe. In the early Vedic texts, cryptic references are found to a city of mirrors located in the southernmost realm, where time was said to pass differently and light reflected on the stone walls like frozen fire. Even the Hopi people of North America speak of a world under the world. Some interpreters suggest that the origin point could be found in the polar regions. However, no conclusive evidence has ever been found. No ruins have been unearthed, nor inscriptions translated. Access to the interior of Antarctica is strictly controlled, and expeditions are infrequent. International treaties prohibit excavations without an explicit scientific purpose, and many areas remain inaccessible due to harsh climatic conditions and logistical impossibility. And yet, strange stories persist. In 2002, a scientific team working near Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake buried under 3 kilometers of ice, reported unexplained magnetic anomalies deep beneath the surface. Their findings were classified as secret shortly thereafter. In 2016, a private satellite company published images showing a massive triangular structure protruding from the ice shelf near the Shackleton Range. Within days, the images were removed without any explanation. Is it simply the result of misinterpretation, optical illusions, or a hyperactive imagination fueled by the charm of the unknown? Perhaps. But what if there was something more? Some researchers suggest that the Antarctic city might not have been built by Homo sapiens, but by a previous intelligent life form. Not extraterrestrial, but pre-human, a civilization that developed in isolation during a prior warm period and disappeared without a trace when the Earth changed. Others relate the Antarctic enigma to the idea of a global cataclysm around 10,800 ACC, a sudden flood throughout the planet that swept away entire civilizations, preserved only in myths and scattered ruins. Could the city under the ice be one of those lost capitals? A metropolis swallowed by time and ice, waiting for a future warm or curious enough to discover it. Perhaps we will never know. The ice is deep, the silence vast, and the secrets of Antarctica remain well hidden under layers of snow and mystery. But there is something in this idea that refuses to disappear. Something attracts us again and again towards this white abyss at the bottom of the world, towards its impenetrable stillness, and the chilling possibility that, under all that, something once lived, something once ruled. And if that was so, what did it know? Let's move on. The world before the flood is vast, and its echoes are far from silent. From the glacial silence of Antarctica, our journey now takes us to warmer, lush, luminous lands veiled in ancient secrets. We enter a realm imbued with legends, where jungle vines wrap stones that whisper of a long-buried past. They are lands where the green never fades, where the emerald canopy extends toward the sky like the vaulted ceilings of forgotten cathedrals. Here, in the heart of dense rainforests, the memory of a civilization beats under moss and roots. They are known by many names, but among those who seek their legacy, they are called the Emerald Builders. We begin in the Amazon basin, a region that early explorers dismissed as uninhabitable, too dense, too wild, too relentless. For centuries, it was thought that it had never harbored any complex civilization. However, the forest has begun to speak. In the last 2 decades, LiDAR technology, a laser scanner from airplanes, has pierced the Emerald Veil. What it reveals below is astonishing. Networks of geometric embankments, massive mounds, causeways, and even urban grids. These structures extend for hundreds of kilometers, hidden for millennia under the relentless growth of the rainforest. Some of them date back thousands of years, long before any civilization believed to have existed in the region. What kind of society left these traces? How did they shape such an extensive world? And why did it disappear without a trace? Archaeologists now believe that the Amazon was once home to millions of people, a civilization, or perhaps a network of civilizations, capable of sophisticated land management, astronomy, and architecture. Their cities were not built with stone, but with earth and plants. Their temples might have been living beings cultivated instead of sculpted, and their technology different from everything we know. Some researchers point to the presence of terra preta, or dark earth, a modified soil rich in carbon and nutrients that extends over thousands of square kilometers. Unlike the acidic soil that surrounds it, this soil retains its fertility for centuries. Its composition is still not fully known. Was this the gift of the Emerald Builders? A bioengineering legacy that turned a hostile land into a sustainable paradise? Conventional scholars are beginning to rewrite the history of the Amazon, but many questions remain unanswered. Who organized these vast systems? How did they communicate across such distances? And where did they go? Local indigenous traditions may contain clues. In the myths of the Yanomami, the Ashaninka, and the Tucano, there are stories of ancient cities made of light and color, ruled by beings of profound wisdom and strange appearance. These figures are not gods in the traditional sense. They are remembered as teachers, architects, and watchmen. Some legends speak of a great exodus, a retreat to the deepest heart of the jungle or to the bowels of the earth when a great flood or a great fire descended from the sky. The echoes of these myths extend well beyond South America. In Mesoamerican legend, there is the story of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent that brought knowledge from the east and disappeared with a promise to return. In the African tradition, the dunes speak of the Namo, amphibious beings that came from space and sowed civilization. In Southeast Asia, temples lost in the jungle, such as those of Angkor in Java, suggest a pattern of vibrant life swallowed by the earth to resurface centuries later covered in moss and silence. Are we facing independent cultural expressions or fragments of a shared memory of something ancient, global, and now almost erased? Among marginal researchers, the Emerald Builders are often associated with a legendary civilization said to predate the flood myths of the ancient world. Some relate them to the elusive continent of Lamria, another submerged land said to be in the Indian or Pacific Oceans. Others suggest that the Emerald Builders were not limited to a single place, but were seafaring people who used rivers and oceans as roads, leaving seeds of knowledge wherever they went. Perhaps most intriguing is the connection with the so-called Emerald Tablets, texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus himself, a fusion of the Egyptian Thoth and the Greek Hermes. These writings, although esoteric and symbolic, speak of the lost wisdom of an era prior to history, of a hidden land of emerald light, and of builders who harness the energies of nature, not by force, but through resonance and balance. Could these be poetic echoes of a real people? A society that aligned itself with Earth's cycles instead of fighting against them. A society whose ruins now lie entangled in roots, with its knowledge encoded in soils and stones too subtle for modern eyes. Skeptics urge caution. Much of the evidence is circumstantial, and the jungle quickly erases all traces. Cities of wood and plants do not fossilize. Oral traditions are prone to transformation. And yet, the magnitude of what has been discovered and what still lies underground forces us to reconsider what we thought we knew. Why do we assume that this vast green world had no history? Could it be that the emerald builders understood something that we have forgotten? That civilization does not need to leave scars on the earth to leave a legacy? That the deepest wisdom does not reside in domination, but in harmony? And if their knowledge survived, where is it now? Perhaps it still sleeps in the jungle, waiting to be remembered. Perhaps it speaks in the language of the trees, in the fertility of the modified soil, in the silent alignment of ancient roads that we have barely begun to trace. The forest does not easily reveal its secrets, but the emerald builders may still have more to tell us. Let's move on. The shadows of the world before the flood still extend over ours, and the journey is far from over. Leaving the tangled canopy of the emerald builders and moving away from the living forest that may once have housed a civilization in harmony with nature, we begin to descend, not towards water or memory, but towards the earth itself. Under our feet lies a vast, stratified, and largely unknown world. A world we walk through daily but rarely think about. Caves that descend kilometers, caverns so large that they generate their own climate, chambers without sunlight, where strange ecosystems flourish in silence. Could it be that, long before the flood swept the surface, another type of civilization thrived? Not above, but below. The idea is not new. Almost all ancient cultures have whispered about beings that inhabit the Earth's interior. From the Greeks, who spoke of Hades and hollow realms under the mountains, to the Hopi, who recounted that their ancestors emerged from under the earth after a great destruction. In Hindu cosmology, the realms of Patala are located below the surface and are not described as places of punishment, but as beautiful and luminous worlds inhabited by powerful, advanced beings. The Tibetans speak of Shambhala, sometimes located in the depths of the earth rather than beyond it. And even the early Christian mystics hinted at the existence of secret domains hidden under mountains. These are stories that are easily dismissed as myths or allegories. But what happens when ancient accounts begin to intersect with modern anomalies? Around the world, we find evidence of vast underground structures, many of which do not have a clear explanation. The Deringuyu complex in Cappadocia, Turkey, is one of these wonders. It is a multi-level underground city carved directly into the volcanic rock, capable of housing more than 20,000 people. It has ventilation ducts, wells, and even defenses. It was hidden from the world until an owner accidentally discovered it in 1963. There is no definitive record of who built it or when. Other sites, such as the Erdstall tunnels of Europe, trace narrow, winding passageways under fields and towns. Their purpose is still unknown. They are found in Germany, Austria, and other countries. They are too small to have a practical use, but they are cut too precisely to be random. In Ecuador and Peru, deep cave systems, such as the Cave of the Tayos, have revealed artificial-looking formations, metallic artifacts, and rumors of hidden libraries carved into rock. However, expeditions often end with more questions than answers. Are these simply shelters built in times of crisis, or secret escape routes for war or persecution? Or are they the remains of something older and stranger? Some fringe researchers suggest these are superficial remains, perhaps gateways to a much deeper, hidden infrastructure predating our current understanding of history. They point to legends of the Agartha network, a proposed system of vast underground cities connected by tunnels crossing continents. According to this theory, the Earth once housed a civilization that moved under the surface to escape a catastrophe, possibly the flood that reshaped the planet around 10,800 BC. Could it be that what we call myths are not fiction, but fragments of memory? That our ancestors once lived under the Earth, whether by necessity or design? The concept of a hollow Earth has long occupied a strange space between science and speculation. Although modern geology confirms that the Earth is made up of layers and that its core is molten, the idea that vast empty spaces exist under the Earth's crust is not as impossible as it seems. In recent years, seismologists have detected enormous voids, low-density zones, and deep anomalies extending hundreds of kilometers under our feet, places where sound waves behave unpredictably and where known physics meets unknown variables. In 2014, a team of researchers discovered a huge reservoir of water locked in mineral form nearly 400 meters below the surface. It was not a lake or ocean, but its volume was so large that it could fill the Atlantic 3 times. Could ancient civilizations have known about these inner realms? Could they have reached them? Some point to strange traditions surrounding entrances to the inner Earth. Mount Shasta in California, the Himalayan mountain range, the Amazon basin, Antarctica, even under the pyramids of Egypt, where closed wells and sealed chambers may hint at something deeper than any tomb. These portals are often described in consistent terms: guarded, hidden, and leading to worlds of light under worlds of stone. World inhabited not by monsters, but by beings of immense knowledge and disturbing silence. Beings that did not perish in the flood because they never lived above it. Skeptics, of course, remain grounded. They argue that the ancient tunnels had practical defensive purposes and that myths about underworlds reflect psychological archetypes. The descent into darkness, the hero's journey, the metaphor of death and rebirth. And maybe they are right. But even so, the Earth continues to reveal its secrets. In 2018, researchers exploring caves under the Nani Valley in Canada, a region full of legends, reported electromagnetic anomalies and temperatures defying environmental logic. In China, new cave systems reveal chambers so vast that clouds form inside them. In South America, native shamans speak of beings who live underground and do not age, watching us through the roots. If an underground civilization existed, what became of it? Did it collapse under pressure like so many other things on the surface? Did it evolve, delving deeper into the heat of the mantle? Or does it remain hidden and intact, watching us from below, even more disturbing? If it is still there, does it remain silent by its own choice? The Earth harbors more than stone and fire. It harbors time and memory and, possibly, the remains of a civilization that did not rise, but descended. Let's move on. We are not done yet with what lies beneath the surface of our forgotten world. From the silent depths of the Earth, we now gently ascend to places where the veil between the visible and invisible seems to thin. Around the world, scattered in deserts, mountains, and remote plateaus, there are places where the air feels heavier, where compasses spin erratically, and where, by all indications, reality behaves differently. Some call these places energy centers. Others refer to them as sacred places. But among those who trace the outlines of ancient pre-flood civilizations, they are known as remains of the vortex culture. A civilization not defined by territory or stone, but by its relationship with the forces that flow through the Earth itself. We begin in the southwestern United States, among the red rocks of Sedona, Arizona. Here, twisted junipers grow in unnatural spirals, and hikers speak of sensations of peace, awe, or intense disorientation. Scientists attribute these phenomena to magnetic anomalies and local mineral content, but indigenous tribes have long considered this land as sacred. The Yavapai Apaches tell of spiritual wind corridors connecting earth to sky, and the elders speak of ancestral beings who could navigate these corridors, guiding and harnessing the energy, even shaping the weather. Similar patterns appear throughout the world. In Wiltshire, England, where Stonehenge casts its ancient shadow, researchers have identified fluctuating geomagnetic fields within the radius of the circle of stones. In the Align Mountains of Siberia, shamans describe natural doors that open during the solstices and allow access to knowledge from another realm. In the Sacred Valley of Peru, the ancient Inca temples are aligned not only with celestial bodies, but also with points of invisible terrestrial energy, places that the Incas called sequated from Cusco, like the spokes of a wheel. What connects all of these sites? Why are so many built at the intersection of ley lines, hypothetical energy channels, some believe run through the planet in a global network? And why do so many pre-flood myths, from Mesopotamia to the Pacific, speak of a people who mastered the currents of the earth itself? The vortex culture, as some researchers have come to call it, may not have left monumental cities or written records, but its legacy, if it exists, could be encoded in the most subtle architecture of the earth, hidden in arrangements of stones, underground chambers, and forgotten patterns engraved in the earth. Let us consider the ancient site of Nabta Playa in the western desert of Egypt, older than Stonehenge, where carefully placed stones mark both solstices and celestial alignments. Under the sand, archaeologists discovered circular mounds and underground structures suggesting ritual use. But the site's orientation also hints at something deeper, an awareness of planetary and energetic flows. Or Wyoming's Great Medicine Wheel, a vast stone circle built atop a high-altitude peak, aligned with the helical rising of certain stars and possibly traced according to the same energetic principles. The oral traditions of Native Americans speak of the wheel as more than just a calendar. It was a place of communion, vision, resonance with underground forces. Were these simply religious observances or practical applications of a forgotten science? Marginal theorists suggest the vortex culture understood something we no longer do. That Earth emits subtle vibratory energies through faults, crystalline deposits, and underground waters, and that these energies can be concentrated, directed, even tuned. According to this vision, the megalithic structures around the world were not simple monuments, but instruments, resonators built to harmonize with the frequency of the Earth, creating zones of perception, healing, or elevated consciousness. Is it a coincidence, they ask, that so many ancient cultures describe gods or beings emerging from whirlwinds, spirals, or rotating disks of light? That in all cultures, the spiral is a sacred symbol. From Celtic petroglyphs to Maori carvings, from Hopi to Hindu yantras, skeptics remain unconvinced. Magnetic anomalies, they argue, are natural, caused by underground geology. The sensations experienced in vortex places are psychological, amplified by expectation and suggestion. The idea of a vortex culture, they say, is a modern projection onto ancient places. And yet, the pattern still persists. In the interior of Australia, the Dreamtime stories of the Aborigines speak of songlines, invisible paths through the land created by ancestral beings that encode geography, direction, and memory in songs. These songlines correspond astonishingly with natural features and resource sites, suggesting an intimate, almost symbiotic knowledge of Earth's energetic structure. In Tibet, monks speak of lungam, a meditative technique allowing the practitioner to move at supernatural speed through great distances. They claim it is not a matter of will, but of flow, of moving in harmony with underground currents. Could the vortex culture have been a loosely connected network of such traditions, transmitted across continents by initiates who understood the world not as fixed, but as fluid? If so, what happened to them? Some believe that the flood that ended their era was not simply water, but a disturbance in the energetic field of the planet, perhaps caused by a cosmic event, a pole shift, or an alteration of the balance. According to this version, the vortex culture did not become extinct. It withdrew, encoding its knowledge in myths, symbols, and scattered temples, awaiting an era in which the hum under the stone could again be heard. There is no evidence, only coincidences, patterns, resonances. But in places where the wind moves strangely and stones align with the stars, the question persists. What did the ancients know that we have forgotten? Did they listen to the earth in a way we no longer do? Let's continue. The past is not always found in what we can touch, but sometimes in what we feel. Let us follow the subtle traces left by the vortex culture, those who perhaps danced with the earth's very energies. Another presence begins emerging from antiquity's shadows, a presence that is not linked to the earth or the stone, but is remembered in whispers, engraved in the oldest myths, and preserved in distant echoes across cultures. They are not known by one name. However, everywhere they are remembered similarly: radiant, otherworldly, luminous, the bright beings. In the highlands of Mesopotamia, among the oldest ruins ever unearthed, Göbekli Tepe's pillars rise from the ground, with carvings of stylized animals and abstract figures that remain sharp despite the passage of more than 11,000 years. Among the symbols, some researchers point to tall, humanoid forms, with broad shoulders, often headless or crowned with radiance. What or whom did these ancient builders revere? Throughout the ancient Near East, the earliest Sumerian texts refer to the Anunnaki, those who came from the sky. They were not simply gods, but judges and teachers who descended from the sky in shining garments. In Egypt, they appear as the Neteru, divine beings with radiant headdresses whose knowledge gave rise to writing, agriculture, and cosmic order. In the pre-Inca tradition, the Viracocha arrived after a great flood. Tall figures, with pale skin and bright eyes, who brought language, laws, and civilization to a shattered world. Why is the motif of powerful and luminous beings so often repeated, especially in stories rooted in the aftermath of catastrophe? The term, the Bright Ones, is not a modern invention. It appears in ancient Hebrew as Elohim, sometimes translated as those who shine, and also in the Zoroastrian tradition as the Ahuras, divine beings of light and fire. The Book of Enoch describes angels as radiant and overwhelming, too bright for human eyes to bear. And in the Celtic tradition, the Tuatha De Danann, mysterious pre-Celtic figures, were said to have descended in shining ships, with glowing skin and wielding powers unknown to man. Were they simply gods, products of imagination and metaphor? Or could they represent something more? Witnesses of a lost era, survivors, or architects of the world before the flood? Conventional historians classify these accounts as myths, metaphors of noble lineages, or symbols of natural forces. And, in fact, much mythology can be understood from this perspective. But some anomalies remain difficult to reconcile. In ancient Peru, high in the Andes, the ruins of Tiwanaku, especially the Gate of the Sun, feature solar motifs, cyclopean stones, and an air of forgotten meaning. Local legends of the Amara say that the city was built by gods who walked among men, gods of light who disappeared during a universal flood. In India, the Mahabharata and the Rigveda describe the Devas, gods of light who flew in aerial chariots and wielded weapons of blinding brilliance. Their enemies, the Asuras, were also described as bright and fiery beings. Their battles were not metaphorical, but cataclysmic and vivid, with earthquakes, skies in flames, and cities disappeared. Even in the heart of Africa, the Dogon people of Mali speak of Anamo, beings of light and water who descended from the sky to bring morality and structure. They associate these bright beings with Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, but described with precision by the Dogon centuries before modern astronomy confirmed its existence. How could so many unrelated cultures invent similar stories about luminous beings descending from the sky, guiding humanity, and then disappearing before the age of kings and empires? Marginal theorists propose that the bright beings could have been remnants of an advanced civilization prior to the flood, whether human, post-human, or something completely different. They suggest that these beings were not supernatural, but deeply wise, perhaps technologically advanced to the point of seeming divine. Their luminosity might not have been literal, but symbolic, representing intellect, insight, or an energy unknown to us. Others explore more esoteric interpretations, according to which the bright beings were interdimensional entities capable of switching between realities. Their sudden appearance and disappearance in myths could point to a deeper understanding of time, space, or consciousness itself. Even so, skepticism is warranted. Oral traditions evolve. Metaphor is powerful. Brightness is an easy symbol to represent power, transcendence, or wisdom. That these beings shown may simply be how the ancients described the overwhelming nature of awe, of mystery, of something greater than themselves. But still, the coherence is hard to ignore. Why do bright beings always appear on the confines of memory, before history, before the flood, bringing gifts of civilization and then disappearing into the mist? Why are they so often described not as gods to be feared, but as guardians, teachers, or observers? And why are their temples, if they built them, so hard to locate? Some believe that the bright beings never ruled from large cities, but moved among the people in liminal places, mountain tops, sacred forests, deep caves, and high deserts. They did not work with stone, but with symbols, with vibrations, with the architecture of language, time, and law. Perhaps their legacy is not ruins that we can excavate, but ideas that we have mistaken for our own. Could it be that what we call civilization was not inherited, but invented? And if the luminous beings were real, what became of them? Did they perish in the cataclysm they predicted? Did they retreat to the sky, the earth, or to somewhere else? Or are they still here, not as luminous beings of myths, but hidden in plain sight, with their brightness attenuated by the passage of time? We do not know, but their presence endures in temples aligned with stars, in myths older than writing, in the disturbing silence that sometimes fills the air in sacred places, as if something had been there, watching and waiting. Let's continue on. The world before the flood has not yet finished to reveal its guardians. From the radiant myths of luminous beings, those beings that may have shaped civilization's first sparks, we now turn our gaze west, to a land far from the deserts of Mesopotamia or the stone sanctuaries of Egypt. A land of undulating mist, ancient forests, and forgotten hills. Here, in the dense, misty mountains of the eastern United States, an ancestral whisper takes root, one that does not speak of a native origin, but of a legacy, a colony established perhaps long before written history began, a relic of Atlantis hidden in the highlands of Appalachia. The Appalachian Mountains, which stretch from Alabama to New York, are among Earth's oldest mountain ranges. Some of their formations date back more than 480 million years. Its stone, older than the Himalayas or the Alps, has witnessed eras of change. The forests that cover these slopes are dense and diverse, hiding countless caves, strange stone circles, and ridges not formed solely by nature. Local legends, especially among the Cherokees and early settlers, have long hinted that these hills conceal strange truths. There are stories of moonstruck people described as pale and short beings who could not see in daylight and who suddenly disappeared, leaving behind mounds and stone walls. The Cherokees believed that these beings already lived on the land when they arrived and that they came from the east, crossing the great waters. Throughout the region, mysterious stone ruins remain unexplained. The wall of Fort Mountain, in Georgia, for example, extends for 850 feet along a mountain ridge. Made of stacked stones without mortar, it has no clear defensive function. Similar stone constructions appear in Alabama, Tennessee, and even in the forests of West Virginia. Conventional archaeologists often attribute them to Native American cultures or early settlers, but many of these structures predate known tribal occupations and lack cultural markers, pottery shards, or tools to help date them. Who built them and why? Some researchers have suggested that these are not remains of isolated tribes, but of a much older presence, one related to the legend of Atlantis itself. According to Plato's account, Atlantis was a vast maritime empire that existed more than 9,000 years before the time of Solon, placing its destruction around 11,600 BC. B. C. It is said that it sent colonies to distant coasts, taking with it knowledge, architecture, and laws. Most have focused on the Mediterranean and the Caribbean as possible sites. But what if one of those colonies went even further, reaching North America's eastern shores and establishing a foothold in the mountainous terrain of what would one day be the Appalachians? Although conventional historians consider it unlikely, there are fragments that arouse curiosity. The presence of copper tools and artifacts in prehistoric European sites, made with pure copper from the Great Lakes, has long intrigued archaeologists. How could the civilizations of the Old World acquire material that could only come from North America? Could there have been transatlantic contact thousands of years before Columbus? Even more intriguing are the accounts of early European explorers of the 16th and 17th centuries who encountered tribes in the interior of the Appalachians with unexpected characteristics, such as gray or blue eyes, lighter skin, and complex oral traditions about ancestors who came from across the sea. Although much of this has been romanticized and often distorted, some ancient accounts, including those of Spanish chroniclers, describe white tribes in the forests of the southeast with villages built of stone and customs different from those of neighboring peoples. Marginal theorists propose that these people, who eventually mixed with or were displaced by later indigenous groups, could be distant descendants of Atlantean settlers. Isolated for millennia, cut off from the world after the cataclysm that submerged their homeland, they might have clung to fragments of their heritage, rituals, symbols, or construction methods until time and wilderness eroded everything except the faintest traces. Then there are the mounds, scattered throughout the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, but also in some parts of the Appalachians, are enormous earthworks shaped like animals, spirals, and even astronomical alignments. The Serpent Mound, in southern Ohio, coils through the earth with a precision that seems almost otherworldly. Although attributed to the Adena or Hopewell cultures, the true origin of some mounds remains a matter of debate. Some scholars argue that the base layers of these structures are much older than the cultures that later built on them. Could the mounds, walls, and myths be echoes of a branch of Atlantean civilization, one that settled far from its origin, adapted to the mountainous landscape, and left behind only shadows and stones? Skeptics urge caution. Oral stories are fluid. Stone ruins are often misinterpreted. There is no definitive evidence, no inscriptions, no unequivocal artifacts. And yet, the mystery lingers. Why is it so difficult to date the oldest structures in the Appalachians? Why do so many cultures describe people who came before and then disappeared? And why do we so often assume that great civilizations could only arise in the ancient world? In the silent forests of the Smoky Mountains, in the shadowy ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains, there are places where silence grows dense. As if the earth remembers something that we do not know. As if, under the layers of earth and the passage of time, the stones kept watching. Perhaps the Appalachians not only keep the memory of ancient rivers and tectonic movements, but something more, something built, something lost, something that waits to be rediscovered. Let's move on. The past, apparently, reaches further than we had imagined, through floods, forests, and myths. From the mountains veiled by the mist of the Appalachians, where the whispers of the lost colonies of Atlantis endure between stone walls and forgotten myths, our path now leads us east, beyond the deserts and temples of the ancient world, beyond the rivers of time, to a land where history is not a straight line, but a wheel. A land that does not speak of a single lost civilization, but of complete cycles of rise and fall. This is India, a place where memory extends to cosmic time and where the idea of forgotten eras is not a theory, but sacred writing. Here, in the dense Sanskrit verses of the Mahabharata, the Puranas, and the Surya Sadhana, we find references not only to kings and dynasties, but to yugas, vast eras of humanity, each governed by its own laws, energies, and beings. According to ancient Hindu cosmology, we do not live in the first world, but in the last flash of a cycle that has been repeated many times before our current era, the Kali Yuga. There are three others: the Dvapara, the Treta, and the Satya Yuga. each one older, each one with a higher level of consciousness, each one culminating in destruction and renovation. But what if these eras were not only symbolic? What if they represented real phases of human civilization? Real peoples, real cultures that arose and disappeared in synchrony with celestial rhythms that we no longer understand. In the Satya Yuga, the first and longest of the four, it is said that supreme truth reigned. Humanity lived in harmony with nature, and suffering was almost unknown. Technology, if it existed, was not mechanical but vibratory, spiritual. Telepathy, levitation, and instantaneous travel appear in the earliest texts, not as miracles, but as normal abilities. Is this a poetic myth, or the distant memory of a civilization that functioned according to principles that we no longer understand? The passage to Tra brought with it decline, but also the birth of great cities and powerful figures. The Ramayana, which according to some interpretations dates from 5000 BC, speaks of flying chariots called Vimanas, vast architectural wonders such as the golden city of Lanka, and weapons that could burn the sky and dry the oceans. These descriptions, although framed in mythical language, have caught the attention of researchers who see them as possible allegories of an advanced technology prior to the flood, energy weapons, flying machines, and even events similar to nuclear ones. Modern archaeologists have often dismissed these claims, citing the lack of material evidence. But the questions remain unanswered. In places like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which were once part of the Indus Valley civilization, strange anomalies have been recorded. Vitrified stone walls, skeletons with unusually high levels of radiation, and sudden abandonments without apparent explanation. Most scholars attribute these phenomena to natural disasters or the decline of trade. Others wonder if they could be remains of a forgotten catastrophe at the end of a yuga. With the dawn of the Dvapara Yuga, humanity moved even further away from harmony. But great knowledge was still present. The epics describe enormous feats of engineering, battle formations in the sky, and sages who mastered the elemental forces. It is in this era when the Mahabharata takes place, which describes a war of such magnitude and devastation that, according to the text, it changed the face of the earth. A passage describes a weapon that produced a column of smoke and flames as bright as 10,000 suns. The hair of the corpses was falling out. The food was poisoned. Critics argue that this is hyperbole, but others point to its disturbing resemblance to the effects of an atomic detonation. Is it possible that the Yuga system encodes the memories of successive civilizations, each destroyed not by myth, but by true cyclical convulsions? According to the Surya Siddhanta, one of the oldest astronomical treatises known to man, the yugas are related to celestial alignments, the precession of the equinoxes, axial changes, and planetary conjunctions. It is not only about spiritual ages, but about measurable eras written in the stars. Conventional science recognizes precessional cycles. A complete oscillation of the Earth's axis lasts approximately 26,000 years. The Vedic system divides this cycle into ascending and descending arcs, suggesting that as we move through space, our consciousness and civilizations ascend and descend in unison. Could it be that the forgotten past of humanity is not the result of a single flood or extinction event, but of recurring astronomical forces? And if so, how many civilizations arose and disappeared before us? Most notable is how coherent this cyclical world vision is within other ancient traditions. The Greeks spoke of the ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each progressively darker. The Mayans described ages of the world called suns, each ending in destruction. The Hopi speak of previous worlds consumed by fire, floods, and ice. In Norse mythology, Ragnarok restarts the cosmos so it can begin again. What are we to think of this convergence? Skeptics argue these are archetypal patterns, common psychological themes embedded in myths. Ancient cultures observing the seasons projected similar cycles in human history, perhaps. But what if it was not simply a projection? What if they were remembering? The terrifying beauty of the Yuga shift model lies in its scale. It does not simply suggest one lost civilization, but many. It does not locate a single Atlantis or Lemura, but layers of forgotten worlds, each more distant, stranger, and unknown than the last. If true, the civilizations of Satya and Treta Yugas would be beyond our imagination, vast in wisdom, unknown in form, terrifying in power. And now, according to texts, we find ourselves in the depths of the Kali Yuga, the age of conflict and spiritual decline. But even this era will end in fire and collapse, and from its ashes a new cycle will begin. Do the ruins under our feet belong to the previous world or the one before? And what traces, if any, will remain of us? The clock, it seems, is not linear. It turns silently and invisibly, marking the rise and fall of civilizations much older, perhaps stranger than anything we have dared to believe so far. Let's move on. The memory of these worlds may be closer than we think. As the echoes of the civilizations of the Yuga shift fade, remains of worlds lost not by time, but cosmic rhythm, we descend again into the greenest abyss of Earth. A place where the light itself seems to filter through a curtain of time, where rivers twist like ancient veins, and the air holds the weight of centuries. We are in the heart of the Amazon. Among its infinite forests, protected by dense canopies and guarded by silence, lies a story whispered by explorers, tribal elders, and a mysterious manuscript, the legend of Acre. In 1972, a German journalist named Karl Buger published the Chronicle of Acre, based on interviews with a man who called himself Tatanka, an alleged prince of an underground jungle kingdom. According to Tatanka, Acre was a hidden city of stone carved into the mountains between Brazil and Peru, founded more than 15,000 years ago by gods who came from the sky. According to him, these gods taught his ancestors the arts of construction, astronomy, and writing. Then they left, promising their return. For most, it was fiction, an invented tale imbued with science fiction and colonial fantasy. But fragments of the story of Acre began to intersect with something far more disturbing: the very geography of the Amazon. Despite its remoteness, the Amazon basin is plagued by ancient enigmas. Enormous terrestrial geometries, circles, squares, and complex designs have been discovered using LiDAR, hidden for millennia under trees and vines. These geoglyphs, some more than 2,000 years old, point to the existence of large organized societies, contradicting the entrenched belief that the Amazon could not harbor advanced pre-Columbian civilizations. But if these vestiges are only a few thousand years old, what could lie even deeper under the layers of jungle and water? According to Tatum Kinera, Acre was part of a network of 13 underground cities connected by tunnels stretching hundreds of kilometers under the earth. He claimed these tunnels predated the flood that destroyed the first world, a flood sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. The surviving elite fled underground, taking knowledge, tools, and sacred artifacts. They would resurface only when the world was ready. These accounts bear a striking resemblance to other mythologies around the world. Flood survivors, underground shelters, celestial gods who teach the first humans. What are these shared symbols or shared memories? Local indigenous legends throughout the Amazon also speak of ancient, vanished cities. The Kikinawa speak of a land beneath the surface where the light is constant and death never comes. The Mayurna whisper of golden cities swallowed by the jungle. Even the Incas, far to the west, spoke of Paititi, a hidden city of great knowledge and lost gods buried somewhere in the eastern forests beyond the Andes. For centuries, explorers searched for these places and found only trees, heat, and death. Percy Fawcett, the famous British explorer, believed that a city like Acre, which he called Z, existed deep within the jungle. He disappeared in 1925 while searching for it. Others followed him. Many never returned. However, clues were left behind. In 2001, Satellite images revealed what appeared to be rectilinear patterns under the forest canopy in western Brazil, possible layouts of cities, roads, and canals. More recently, in 2018, LiDAR surveys in the Bolivian Amazon discovered vast systems of urban planning, squares, causeways, and even pyramidal mounds hidden under trees. These discoveries suggest a far greater cultural complexity than assumed. However, Acre does not appear in known archaeological records. Its name does not appear in Quechua, Tupi, or any native language cataloged by modern linguists. Was it an invention, a deception designed to obtain benefits, or to create a personal myth? Perhaps, but there is something peculiar about the persistence with which history clings to the region's deepest mysteries. The Chronicle of Acre describes a flood similar to those found in the Sumerian, Biblical, and Vedic texts, a global catastrophe that marks the end of one civilization and the beginning of another. According to the account, the survivors were not primitive. They were guardians of an ancestral knowledge who took refuge underground to preserve what the surface could no longer contain. This idea of a hidden remnant of a pre-flood culture that lives under our world echoes once again the stories of Agartha Shambhala and the civilizations of the depths of the earth. Could Acre be another piece of that global puzzle? Some researchers have tried to relate Tatan Canera's account to obscure archaeological findings. Strange stone structures along the Purus River, petroglyphs in Acre that seem to represent stellar symbols, and humanoid figures with elongated heads. Others argue that the entire narrative is too contaminated by invention to be considered reliable. And maybe they're right. But Amazon is a place that resists finality. Even today, more than 80 uncontacted tribes are believed to live deep within its folds. Its soil, blackened by ancient bioengineering terra preta, continues to produce harvests centuries after being abandoned. Its rivers hide sunken temples, unexplored caves, and buried cities that have not yet been named. So if a people once fled the surface to preserve their knowledge, if they built under the forest, waiting for a world that could listen to their voice again, where would we expect to find them but here? Acre may be an invented name, a story shaped by fantasy, but what it points to, a memory of catastrophe, survival, and something deeply advanced that hides beneath the veil of a jungle, is not unique. It is a motif that is repeated so often in so many territories that its absence would be more suspicious than its presence. That is why we must ask ourselves, beneath the rivers, beyond the ruins, under the roots of the oldest trees, is there still something that observes, listens, and waits? Let's continue. Because the jungle has not yet finished speaking, and the waters may have buried more than we have dared imagine. From the tangled shadows of the jungle myths of Acre, where floods, memories, and underground secrets intertwine, we now cross continents toward a different silence. A silence not formed by vegetation, but by stone. A silence that radiates heat during the day and a supernatural stillness at night. Here, on the burned plateaus of Egypt, the history of civilization begins anew. Or maybe it began before. On the edge of the Nile, under layers of sand and narratives, lies an enigma, the Osirian civilization. A name that does not appear in the usual textbooks, but that is whispered by researchers who suspect that the true origins of Egypt go back far beyond the dynasties of the pharaohs, to prehistory, to an era before the flood, before the gods of men were sculpted into recognizable forms. We begin in Abydos, one of the most ancient sacred places in Egypt. For most, it is known as the burial place of Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. But beneath the later temples and ruined tombs hides something else. The Osirian. Unlike the surrounding structures, carved in traditional dynastic styles, the Osirian is different. It lies sunken into the ground. Built with huge blocks of granite weighing up to 100 tons each, it is much larger and coarser than anything built during the reign of Seti I, to whom the surrounding temple complex is attributed. The stones are fitted with a precision reminiscent of other megalithic mysteries around the world, such as the constructions of Peru, Baalbek, and even Göbekli Tepe. Why would a temple from the time of the New Kingdom be built on a structure using techniques associated with much older civilizations? Did the pharaohs perhaps inherit these foundations instead of creating them? Conventional Egyptology maintains that the Osirian was built by Seti I as a symbolic tomb for Osiris. Although its architectural style and its materials differ significantly from the rest of its temple, there are no inscriptions that detail its construction, nor records that explain its purpose. It simply exists, excavated in the rock, as if it had been placed there in another era. Could this be the last vestige of civilization before the flood? A civilization that the later Egyptians remembered not as a historical fact, but as a myth? The god Osiris is fundamental to Egypt's spiritual identity. He is the bringer of agriculture, the first to teach humanity to live in balance with nature, and ruler of the underworld. But the oldest myths do not describe him as a purely divine figure, but as a king, a being that reigned on earth during a golden age before being betrayed, dismembered, and resurrected. According to pyramid texts, Osiris was already ancient when pyramids were built. Some scholars suggest that Osiris could represent the deified memory of a real being, the echo of a forgotten leader from a distant era, whose presence marked a civilizing moment in a world recovering from catastrophe. The idea of an Osirian civilization suggests that the first gods of Egypt, Osiris, Isis, and Horus, were not invented by the dynastic Egyptians, but inherited. Perhaps they were not gods at all, but remembered beings from an earlier time. Teachers, builders, survivors of the flood. This echoes the description that Plato gives of Atlantis, which according to him was lost in 9600 AC, a date disturbingly close to the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt climatic changes and global floods. According to the Egyptian priests who spoke with Solon, the Egyptians themselves had records that went back 9,000 years before their time. Those records, they said, described other worlds, other civilizations destroyed by water and fire. Where are those records now? Some believe that the Hall of Records, a legendary archive said to be hidden under the Sphinx or in some other place in Egypt, contains remains of this pre-dynastic knowledge. Although no such chamber has been conclusively discovered, ground-penetrating radar studies near the Sphinx have identified unexplained voids under its legs. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has been reluctant to proceed with excavations. Then there is the question of water erosion on the Sphinx itself, especially along its enclosure walls. Geologists like Robert Schoch have argued that the deep, vertical erosion patterns suggest prolonged rains, possibly since 700 AC, or even before, long before the official chronology for the Sphinx's construction. Could the Sphinx, the Osirian, and other enigmatic sites be the last eroded expressions of a long-vanished civilization? And if so, what kind of world was it? The Osirian myth speaks of a land governed by harmony, where the Nile flowed to the rhythm of the stars and life was guided not by conquest, but by wisdom. A civilization that was not measured by its wars, but by its understanding of the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Its knowledge was not codified in words, but in resonances, symbols, and alignments. We still do not know how the Osirian was built. No nearby quarry could have provided those stones. No papyrus records the method. The more we excavate, the older and more enigmatic the foundations seem. Could it be that the Osirian civilization was not simply a forgotten chapter in human history, but a prelude to it? That our oldest religions, our oldest myths, our diffuse memories of an era in which gods walked as kings in stone was not molded by hand, but by understanding? Or is this also a mirror that reflects our desire to find continuity in chaos, a legacy in silence? The stones do not answer, but endure. Let's go further. The flood may have erased the names, but the foundations still remain. From the eroded stone foundations of the Osirian legacy, buried in the depths of the sands and myths of Egypt, we now head toward a colder and stranger horizon, beyond the limits of most maps, beyond the edge of memory. We move north, where the sea darkens and the air becomes rarefied by an ancient silence. This is the kingdom that the Greeks called Thule, a place of icy fogs, midnight suns, and forgotten powers. But what exactly was Thule? First mentioned by Pytheas, a Greek explorer of the 4th century AC, Thule was described as the northernmost land reachable by boat beyond the British Isles, where the ocean became a gelatinous substance and the sun barely set. Pytheas never claimed to have landed there, only that he saw it from afar. Later, Roman writers dismissed his account as a fantasy. However, the name remained. Thursday became a symbol, an enigma, and for some, a memory. What if Thursday was more than just a poetic reference to the limit of the known world? What if it once housed a civilization that prospered not thanks to bronze or conquest, but knowledge? A hidden empire that was based not on power, but on alchemy. Scattered in esoteric texts, medieval grimoires, and secret traditions, we find curious traces of a lost kingdom of the north, one that was not governed by swords, but secrets. In Renaissance Europe, the term Thule began to appear on maps and alchemical diagrams, often associated with transformation, hidden wisdom, and eternal return. Some mystics spoke of Thule as the cradle of alchemy, a place where matter and spirit met in equilibrium, where science and myth were not yet separated. Could it be that Thursday was not just a place, but a state of knowledge? A civilization that mastered the deep symbolic understanding of natural laws long before such terms existed. Legends describe the inhabitants of this land as people with pale skin, tall and serene, dressed in simple garments marked with arcane symbols, not royal robes. They did not work with tools, but with harmonics, frequencies, and metals whose names are forgotten. They did not build empires of stone, but of transformation. Some stories tell of shining towers that glowed in the snow, of libraries carved in ice, of consciousness elevated through rituals and resonances. Of course, conventional historians consider Thursday a myth, perhaps Iceland or the coasts of Norway, an outpost misinterpreted and confused over centuries of oral traditions. However, certain details remain curiously persistent. For example, the Hyperborean tradition, closely linked to Thursday in many esoteric circles, describes a land beyond the north wind where the sun shone perpetually and people lived in harmony for thousands of years. Greek accounts place Hyperborea somewhere near the Arctic polar circle. The inhabitants of that land were said to be long-lived, wise, and oblivious to disease. Their knowledge did not come from conquest, but from tuning into the cosmos. Some researchers suggest a relationship between these myths and the Indian Yuga cycles. Both point to an earlier, pure era of human existence. Could Thursday or Hyperborea have been a real civilization before the flood? One that existed during a temperate Arctic era long before glacial ice swallowed its cities. Recent geological studies show that some parts of the Arctic were once green. Core samples under the Greenland ice sheet contain pollen, plant matter, and even traces of running water. Around 10,000 BC. At the end of the Younger Dryas, rapid climate changes could have made the high north habitable for a brief time before it was buried by cold and silence. If a civilization really existed there, its ruins would now lie under kilometers of ice. There are no temples to excavate. Curiously, some of the strongest and strangest magnetic anomalies on Earth are found near the poles. In certain areas, compasses spin erratically, clocks stop working, and even GPS systems fail. Pilots flying over these areas have reported disorientation, instrument malfunction, and in exceptional cases, unexplained visual phenomena, such as curtains of light that curve unnaturally, as if something under the ice is still active. Marginal theorists suggest that the alchemical empire of Thursday might not have disappeared, but retreated. According to some interpretations, its people had long mastered not only physical alchemy, the transformation of base metals into gold, but also spiritual alchemy, the elevation of consciousness. In doing so, they may have moved to a completely different state of existence. They are not dead nor lost. They're simply somewhere else. And if this civilization once operated on the border between the material and the immaterial? Could it still influence the world through ideas, symbols, and forgotten rites transmitted in secret? Could the echoes of their teachings have sown the Hermetic texts of Alexandria, the alchemical treatises of the Middle Ages, or the mystical diagrams of the Rosicrucians and early thinkers of the Enlightenment? To this day, references to Thursday persist in remote corners of esoteric literature, not as a political power, but as a spiritual axis, a polar myth around which the great wheel of time revolves. Not a kingdom to govern, but a geometry to awaken. Their teachings encrypted in numbers, symbols, and sounds. Skeptics dismiss all this, of course, as symbolic exaggeration, the projection of a myth onto maps. But what if the very absence of evidence was the key? What if the greatest alchemy of Thule was not the transmutation of metal, but of memory? The creation of a civilization so subtle, so in tune that when the waters rose and the ice returned, it left not ruins, but resonance. And if the cold still keeps its secret under the auroras, beyond the wind, and under the infinite white, what would we find if we listened carefully? Let's continue. The road gets colder, but not quieter. Ice. Our journey descends again, but not toward darkness, nor toward silence, nor toward myth. Under the mountains and jungles, the deserts and seas, there exists a legend so persistent, so quietly repeated across continents, that it refuses to disappear. A civilization not from the stars, nor from the sea, but from the earth itself. Agartha. Agartha is known by many as the inner world, a hidden kingdom that is said to be in the depths of the earth, which can only be accessed through forgotten portals in the Himalayas, the Andes, or the poles. But before the entry doors existed, before the world cracked and turned inward, there may have been another chapter still, an era in which the Agarthians lived above, on the surface, when they walked among the first human beings as teachers, as builders, as something more. High in the Himalayas, wrapped in snow and rarefied air, the legends still endure. The monasteries of Tibet speak of Shambhala, the radiant capital of the inner world, governed by beings of immense wisdom. But older than Shambhala are the stories of those who lived on the surface, those who came before the retreat, before the descent to earth. It is said that these ancestors lived in a world of balance. They understood not only nature, but the nature behind nature. They spoke in frequencies constructed with sound. They harnessed subtle energies that modern science is only beginning to name. Is this simply a spiritual allegory? Or is it the fading memory of a civilization before the flood, one that once stood on the surface before disappearing beneath it? In the Theosophy of the 19th century, Helena Blavatsky spoke of root races and ancient peoples who came from lands now lost, Atlantis, Lemura, Hyperia, and whose descendants fled underground to preserve their knowledge after a global cataclysm. Although much of her writings are now considered controversial or speculative, she was not alone in pointing out the existence of a forgotten people whose legacy lies hidden under stone and metaphor. Throughout the world, traditions speak of beings who emerged from the depths or retreated into the earth. But what if those were not beginnings, but endings? What if the Agarthian civilizations that we imagine underground were originally cultures that inhabited the surface, highly advanced, possibly before the flood, and what we now call Agartha was a refuge, not a point of origin? The Andes harbor some of the strongest echoes of this. In the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, certain Inca legends describe ancestors who fled underground after the world was engulfed by water and fire. The entrances, they say, still exist near Lake Titicaca, in the caverns of the Amazon, under the ruins of Pumapunku. Some of these sites, especially in Tiwanaku, feature megaliths so precise, so out of reach of pre-Columbian tools, that their origin remains a mystery. Are these the remains of an Agarthian culture on the surface? A culture that knew the flood was coming and left marks on the stone? Then there is Mount Kailash in Tibet, a peak never climbed, considered sacred by Hindus, Buddhists, Jainists, and Bonpos alike. According to Tibetan tradition, is a spiritual center of the world. Some say it hides an entrance, but others, based on older myths, suggest that it was once a throne, a capital, a bastion on the surface of a gone civilization before the shift inward. Interestingly, Kyash is aligned in a way that reflects the ancient temples of Egypt and Angkor, suggesting a shared knowledge of celestial architecture. Its pyramidal symmetry is disturbing, its isolation is total, and no one knows what is inside. But perhaps the most pressing question is not where the ancestors of Agarthan lived, but what they were. Not necessarily extraterrestrials, not necessarily human as we understand them, but something in between. The descriptions of these beings vary according to traditions. Sometimes they are tall and radiant, other times pale and austere. They are rarely depicted as conquerors, but as observers, custodians, even guardians of natural law. They lived in what the ancients called harmony, a word that modern civilization often interprets as aesthetic or emotional, but which may once have had a deeper technical meaning. Harmony as technology, as a science of balance, resonance, and invisible forces. Could the Agarthian civilization have been the last world culture before the Great Flood? A people who lived in balance, not only with the environment, but with planetary rhythms. And when the balance was broken, did they descend not out of fear, but as a retreat to memory, to protection? Some researchers believe that the legends of Agartha's retreat reflect those of the mythical Nephilim, giants who walked the earth, taught forbidden knowledge, and were expelled by the flood. Others see parallels in the Vedic accounts of Asuras, powerful intelligent beings who lived underground after being expelled from the celestial realms. Could these be distorted memories of the same civilization, reinterpreted through different cultural lenses? Skeptics argue, of course, that this is mythology disguised as history, that Agartha is a spiritual metaphor, a reflection of interiority, not a literal place. But what if it were both? What if, as with so many ancient concepts, the line between physical truth and metaphysical meaning was never meant to be separate? The earth has depths that we still do not understand, caves that we have never mapped, cavities so vast that they could house cities, anomalous readings from deep radars, unexplained seismic echoes, and even ancient maps suggest that there is more to the world beneath our feet than we know. And if something truly ancient descended millennia ago to wait, observe, and remember, how would we know? Perhaps the clues are not in the ruins or the relics, but in the silence we feel in sacred mountains, in the precision of ancient alignments, in how certain stories endure long after their names have fallen into oblivion. Who were the Agarthian ancestors of the surface? Were they the last chapter of a forgotten golden age or the prologue to another yet to come? Let's delve even deeper now. The past may not have vanished. Perhaps it has simply moved beneath the surface. From the depths of Agartha, where memory may have retreated into silence and stone, we now return to the surface, but not to our modern world. We descend to an era so distant that even myths begin to fade. An era before the known kings, before the pyramids, before the Great Flood. In a land between two rivers, under layers of silt and sand, a name endures, the Anunnaki. Ancient Mesopotamia, in present-day Iraq, is often called the cradle of civilization. It is here, in the fertile plains of Sumer, that we find the first writing system, the first legal codes, and some of the first monumental temples. But buried in these early records, engraved on clay tablets with cuneiform letters, lies a story much older than the empires, a story of gods, of cosmic conflicts, and of a creation that is not entirely ours. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki as divine beings who came from the heavens. Their own name means those who came down from above. Unlike later deities, these figures were not abstract embodiments of natural forces. They had ranks, councils, and disagreements. They gave orders, built structures, and, according to the Epic of Atrahasis, created humanity. But what was this first creation? The tablets do not begin with humanity as we know it, but with something else. A world ruled by the Anunnaki themselves, where work had become unbearable. The lower ranks, called Ijiji, were entrusted with the task of maintaining the land, digging canals, moving earth, and observing the stars. Eventually, they rebelled against them. In response, the Anunnaki gods, led by Enki and Ninhursag, devised a solution: a species of workers, helpers, something between the divine and the earthly, something that could carry the burden for the gods. This was not just a simple myth. It was a detailed, methodical, and disturbingly clinical process. The tablets speak of blood mixed with clay, of gestation in the womb of a goddess, of trial and error, of failed creations, of beings who could not speak, others who could not stand, until success was finally achieved: a human being. However, some researchers argue that this first creation may not have been us, that the initial experiments gave rise to something quite different, a race neither divine nor completely human, stronger, perhaps more intelligent, but unstable or too independent or difficult to control. These first creations, which are indirectly alluded to in the texts as primitive men or those who were before, are never described in detail. But some scholars point to hints in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, which speaks of monstrous hybrids forged in chaos and locked away. Were these mythological symbols allegories for chaos before order? Or were they real memories? The notion of a forgotten prehuman race is not unique just to Mesopotamia. In almost all ancient traditions, there are accounts of a first people, giants, titans, demigods who lived before the current world. The Greeks spoke of the Golden Age, an era in which divine beings lived among mortals. The Egyptians had the Zep Tepi, the first ruled by god-kings. The Mayans spoke of previous worlds destroyed by their creators because their inhabitants were imperfect or disobedient. Could these be distorted echoes of the Anunnaki's first creation? Marginal theorists suggest that the first human prototypes were genetically modified by an advanced race, not by gods, but by extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings. According to this theory, the Anunnaki were not deities, but advanced intelligences with technological capabilities far superior to our own. The stories of clay and blood are interpreted as metaphors for genetic manipulation. The first experiments with DNA were hidden beneath the poetic language of myths. But even within conventional archaeology, questions still remain. How did Sumerian civilization appear so suddenly and completely? Why do the first writings already include a complex cosmology, advanced mathematics, and detailed astronomical knowledge? Why do some ancient tablets refer to specific celestial bodies, such as the outer planets, long before telescopes existed? There's also a curious reference in the Sumerian text to a planet called Nibiru, the supposed home of the Anunnaki. Often associated with a long, elliptical orbit, it is said to return every few thousand years, bringing agitation with it. Most scientists dismiss this as a mythological metaphor or a misinterpretation of some astronomical symbols. However, the persistence of the story is striking, especially when combined with the myths of global floods and the inexplicable planetary events of the distant past. Could the first creation of the Anunnaki have existed during a prior climatic era? Perhaps before the Younger Dust, before the flood. If so, what became of them? Some believe that the remains of these first creations endure in global mythology. The giants of Genesis, the Nephilim, the Watchers, beings too destructive to remain. The Book of Enoch speaks of divine beings who mingled with the first humans and taught them forbidden knowledge, astronomy, metallurgy, and magic. Their children were unnatural, ungovernable, and eventually destroyed by the flood. Was this the true reason for the cataclysm? It was not a punishment, but a measure for containment. If so, then our ancestors, the modern human race, may not have been the first creation of the Anunnaki, but their substitute, a second attempt, a more manageable form of intelligence. Intelligent enough to serve, but limited enough to control them. And if this is true, is it possible that traces of the first creation still exist in our myths, in our DNA, in the stories we tell about gods and monsters, about lost ancient knowledge? The tablets remain silent. Their irregular characters are chipped and eroded by time. But in their careful order, in their measured lines, we intuit something more than a fable, a structure, a story, a memory transmitted in the only way it could survive. Who really were the Anunnaki? Scientists, custodians, interveners in a world that was not quite theirs? And what was the very first thing they created? Let's move on now. The deeper we go, the less clear the beginning becomes. From the engraved clay tablets of ancient Sumeria, where the Anunnaki may have created a first creation now lost to time, we turn our gaze to the sky, but not to the heavens as a concept of faith or imagination. Instead, we turn to the physical sky and the stones that fell from it. Stones that shaped myths, stones that may have shaped civilizations, and perhaps the beings that came with them. Scattered across the humid lands of the heart of Africa, under the roots of dense jungles and the red dust of the savannas, lies a story rarely told outside select circles. A story passed down by the elders in a low voice, preserved more in memory than in manuscripts. It is the story of the people of the Sky Stones, a name given by some to a forgotten race linked not to the earth, but to the stars and the mysterious materials they left. In the 1990s, a strange discovery in Sierra Leone caught the attention of researchers worldwide. Local tribes spoke of sky stones, bluish, ceramic-like fragments that, according to oral tradition, had fallen from the sky long ago. These stones were not metallic like common meteorites, but fragile and opaque, with a pale blue hue that seemed almost artificial. Geological tests revealed that they were composed primarily of oxygen and a silicon-like substance with traces of elements that did not clearly fit into known mineral records. Some samples also showed properties that suggested exposure to extreme heat, a heat not naturally found on Earth's surface. What could they be? A natural oddity, perhaps? Remains of ancient space activity? Or, as local accounts insisted, fragments of something far larger? Among the Kono and Kissi peoples, stories tell of star beings who arrived on Earth long ago, tall, pale-skinned, with hair like fire and eyes like moonlight. They did not descend with anger or glory, but in sadness. Their world, they said, had been utterly destroyed. The stones that fell were fragments of it, remnants of their home now scattered across the earth. Some say they taught the first humans to follow the stars, to shape stone, and to pronounce the names of plants in ways that would heal rather than harm. Is this simply folklore or a distant echo of contact and a catastrophe? The idea of celestial beings arriving with stones or fire from the sky is not unique to West Africa. In the cosmology of Dune, one of the most complex astronomical systems in pre-modern Africa, there are references to a star system invisible to the naked eye. Sirius B. The Dune not only described its existence long before modern telescopes confirmed it, but also claimed that it was the origin of the Namo, amphibious beings who descended to Earth in an ark that caught fire as it fell. These stories speak of transformation, of DNA in the form of spirals, of star maps carved into stone. In Central Australia, Aboriginal peoples speak of the Wanina, celestial beings who arrived in cloudy ships and left knowledge, laws, and works of art in stone, often hauntingly humanoid figures with large eyes and radiant heads. In Central America, the Aztecs believed that their ancestors came from Alan, a place that fell from the sky. In East Asia, myths tell of dragons descending in orbs of fire, bringing celestial wisdom. Could all these stories, though filtered through different languages and symbols, go back to a common memory in which some beings arrived from the skies, not as gods, but as survivors? Some researchers propose that the people of the celestial stones might not be native to Earth, but came from a destroyed world, possibly a planet in our solar system that disintegrated long ago, like the hypothetical planet Vive or the mysterious remains of the asteroid belt. Others suggest that they were part of a failed colonization attempt, a presence before the flood that aimed to sow knowledge or life, but was annihilated by natural forces or human rebellion. If this seems far-fetched, consider the following. On several continents, the oldest myths consistently describe an era when the sky collapsed. In the Rig Veda of India, It is said that the sky collapsed. In the Hopi tradition, fire rained from the sky. In Sumer, the gods destroyed entire cities with weapons that darkened the sky and poisoned the earth. Could these be metaphors for a celestial bombardment? Or could they be literal memories of a cataclysm in which beings of the sky participated? The fragments of strange materials found around the world further fuel these questions. The iron pillar of Delhi, in India, remarkably resistant to rust, is made of iron with high phosphorus content forged with a method lost to modern metallurgy. In Greenland, ancient meteorites were collected by the Inuit people and turned into tools long before iron smelting was known. In Turkey, in the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, certain carvings appear to show cosmic impacts, comets, stars, and even figures falling. Were these warnings, commemorations, or part of a larger story? Skeptics remain cautious here. They argue that unusual minerals alone do not make a civilization. Legends evolve, mix, and become distorted. The so-called sky stones may be rare geological phenomena only. But the persistence of the theme, beings from the sky who bring knowledge, build structures, and then disappear, refuses to disappear. It endures in petroglyphs, in ancient rituals, in a way early humans did not look at the ground, but at the stars, seeking something they once knew. Could the inhabitants of Skystone have been some of the first survivors of the impact? Or the remains of a civilization before the flood that fell not because of the earth, but because of the ruin of another world? And if they came here, if fragments of their world still lie buried in our soil, scattered through time, what else did they leave behind? Perhaps the stones are only part of story. Perhaps the rest still sleeps under our feet or above us. Let's move on now. The stars may not be as far away as they seem now. As the last vestiges of the people of the celestial stones fade into the clouds from which they may have fallen, we now turn to something older, stranger, and in many ways more disturbing. Because although many legends before the flood speak of beings that descended from the stars, others whisper of a presence that arose, not from above, but from below. They were not aliens, nor fully human, but something more. Something old, something serpentine here. We enter the forgotten realm of the Ophite civilization. The name Ophite comes from the Greek and means snake. In later centuries, it would be applied to a Gnostic sect that venerated the serpent not as a tempter, but as a liberator, the one who gave knowledge, not deception. But some believe that the term has a far older lineage. That long before the rise of Sumer or Egypt, there existed a civilization before the flood whose identity, power, and very image were linked to the serpent. Our journey begins in the ruins of Catalhuyuk, in present-day Turkey, one of the oldest known urban settlements, dating back to at least 700 BC. See among its carefully aligned adobe houses and sanctuaries, archaeologists have discovered recurring serpentine motifs painted, carved, and even sculpted on walls. Snake heads protrude from the altars. Coiled shapes meander through the plaster and lie buried under floors. Generations of ancestors were buried there, often with reptile-shaped objects. Were these just symbols of fertility, or did they mean something deeper and older? Throughout the ancient world, the iconography of the serpent is persistent, powerful, and often paradoxical. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl, bearer of law and god of the wind. In India, the Nagas were semi-divine, serpentine beings who were said to live in underground palaces and guard the hidden knowledge of the earth. In Africa, the Dahomey spoke of Dan, the rainbow serpent that surrounded the world. In the early Hebrew texts, the Nachash, often mistranslated as snakes, were luminous and intelligent beings who imparted forbidden wisdom. Why this global consistency now? Why do snakes appear in the oldest myths not only as animals, but as beings, guardians, architects, and even progenitors? Some esoteric traditions suggest that a civilization of light may have preceded all known cultures that existed in the lost window of time before the flood, an era when the earth was not governed by nations or tribes, but by a more arcane order. According to these accounts, The Ophites were a race of serpentiform beings or associated with snakes, not in the literal sense of scaly monsters, but as an advanced people whose consciousness, movements, and symbology were deeply aligned with serpentine principles: energy, flow, regeneration, and hidden power. The famous Kundalini of Indian yogic science, the spiral energy said to be found at the base of the spine, bears a striking resemblance to this archetype. The same is true of the caduceus, the ancient symbol of medicine, two twin snakes that coil spirally upwards along a central axis. Could these symbols, still used today, be inherited fragments of an Ophite worldview? A worldview that encoded spiritual ascent, transformation, and hidden knowledge through the language of the snake. At the ancient Ubaid site, not far from where the first Sumerian cities would later emerge, archaeologists discovered a series of strange figurines dating from the 6th millennium BC. These small statues represent humanoid figures with elongated skulls, slanted eyes, and, most peculiar, reptilian features. Some cradle babies, others sitting in majestic poses. Their provenance is uncertain, and their meaning is the subject of heated debate. Are they ancient idols of fertility, proto-deities, or relics of an extinct lineage? Conventional archaeologists warn against sensationalism. They argue that reptilian images are often symbolic and can be interpreted in many cultural contexts. But even they recognize the peculiar consistency of these motifs, especially when combined with oral traditions that describe ancient bearers of knowledge who had scales, were cold to the touch, or moved like the wind through grass. Could that civilization really have existed? A culture so old that it now exists only in mythical form? Its eroded structures, its lost language, its memory wrongly archived as a metaphor. Some theories go even further. Marginal researchers have proposed that the Ophites were not only symbolic or metaphorical, but a hybrid species, possibly the result of early genetic experiments, whether directed by humans or introduced from elsewhere. According to this vision, the world before the flood may have housed multiple intelligent lineages, some more human, others less, each of which arose and fell before our own version of history began. It is here that the legend of the Great Flood takes on a new and chilling tone. Was it simply a response to human corruption or a selective cleansing of beings that once roamed the surface alongside us? Beings who possessed knowledge considered dangerous, heretical, or uncontrollable. In the Gnostic texts unearthed in Nag Hammadi, the snake is not the deceiver of Eden, but the awakener, the one who opens the eyes of Adam and Eve to the nature of reality. The archons, jealous of this knowledge, banished him. But the Ophites preserved the tradition, remembering the snake not as a threat, but as a teacher. Is it possible that this religious reinterpretation preserved the last philosophical vestige of a real people, whose legacy was forcibly rewritten? And if so, what could they have known? Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Ophite mystery is that it never completely disappears. From the underground temples of Malta, excavated with winding serpentine corridors, to the megalithic stone rings of South Africa, known as the Calendar of Adam, passing through the riddles whispered in our oldest texts, the snake remains not as a warning, but as a question. Who are the Ophites? A lost civilization, a suppressed lineage, or simply the first to understand that knowledge, like a snake, must coil in secret until the time comes to resurface? Let's continue. There are still more layers to unveil, and the snake has not finished speaking. From the dark myths of the Ophite civilization, where serpentine wisdom may have shaped the first paths of knowledge, we now ascend to a much more radiant, but no less mysterious story. A city that is not carved in stone or has grown from the ground, but is described as bright, elevated, suspended between worlds. A city seen not only through vision, but through revelation. This is the legend of the city of light, Enoch. Our journey does not begin in geography, but in the scriptures. Deep in the apocryphal texts of the book of Enoch, an ancient manuscript that was once revered and then fell into oblivion, a city beyond the reach of mortals is mentioned. Enoch, the seventh patriarch of the line of Adam, is taken in body and soul, without dying, to a realm beyond earth. There he sees a luminous place, structured to perfection and inhabited not by humans, but by angels. I saw a structure built with crystal stones. Between those stones moved tongues of living fire. The ground shone like the stars, and the roof was not of stone, but of flashes of lightning and fluid fire, writes Enoch. What was this vision? A symbolic description of heaven? Or could it have been a memory encoded in the scriptures of something real, something once seen in a forgotten era before the flood? The Book of Enoch, written in Gaelic and preserved mainly through the Ethiopian tradition, predates much of the modern biblical canon and has long been a source of controversy. However, its details are unusually specific, as it not only names a celestial city, but also the Watchers, a class of angels who descend to earth, teach forbidden knowledge, and create descendants that threaten the order of the world. His punishment and the flood that is coming form the backdrop of the ascent of Enoch. Some scholars argue that this narration reflects ancient Mesopotamian myths of the Anunnaki or Greek stories of the Titans, powerful beings who break divine law and are dethroned. But within Enoch's story, there is a more curious element. The city itself, the abode of saints, not a metaphorical heaven, but a structured domain with walls, gates, towers, and geometry. Could this city of light have existed in some form on or near Earth before the flood swept it away? Ancient astronaut theorists propose that what Enoch saw was not a spiritual revelation, but a technologically advanced city. Perhaps a kind of orbital station or sanctuary on a mountaintop built by an advanced civilization mistaken for angels. For them, crystal and fire might not describe mysticism, but artificial light, energy fields, plasma, or metal unknown to ancient minds. Could Enoch have witnessed not the afterlife, but a pre-flood enclave of immense technological sophistication? There are ruins around the world that seem to whisper in the same language. On top of Mount Hermon, where according to tradition the Watchers first descended, lie megalithic ruins with patterns more aligned with the stars than the seasons. In Bolivia, the mysterious remains of Tiwanaku, especially the sunken temple of Calisea, present architectural anomalies suggesting advanced astronomical knowledge. And in Baalbek, Lebanon, the trilithon stones, each weighing more than 800 tons, lie in the heart of a temple platform whose origins remain unexplained. Did these scattered foundations form part of the same pre-flood world that Enoch glimpsed? In later mystical traditions, especially among Renaissance magicians such as John Dee and Edward Kelly, the term Enochian acquired a new meaning, referring to a divine language supposedly revealed by angelic intelligences. It was said to be the original language of humanity, one that not only served for communication, but also for creation, a vibratory key to shape reality. If such a language ever existed, could it have resonated in a luminous city where language and structure were one and the same? Could Enoch's city of light have been a kind of archive, a sanctuary of pure geometry and sacred knowledge, a place built not to last, but to remain hidden, veiled by allegory and fire? Skeptics, of course, argue that the Book of Enoch is apocalyptic literature intended to inspire fear and awe, not to convey a literal story. But even they recognize its strange coherence. Unlike other visionary texts, it presents its otherworldly scenes with architectural precision. Measured steps, jeweled walls, chambers of fire, pillars of light. Was Enoch a prophet or chronicler? Some interpretations suggest that the city of light was not destroyed, but withdrawn. Like the Agarthians, like Shambhala, it moved beyond the veil to a higher dimension or frequency, inaccessible to modern perception. Others suggest that it still exists in a remote place hidden on purpose. The flood may have erased much, but not everything. And for those who know where to look or listen, the echoes of Enoch's journey can still be found. The highlands of Ethiopia, where the Book of Enoch survived in secret for centuries, are shrouded in mystery. Churches carved into the rock, monasteries hidden in cliffs, stories of sacred relics guarded for millennia. Could something have survived here? Some memory of the city? Encoded in the liturgy, in songs, or in symbols? We do not know. But the vision of Enoch has endured for more than 2,000 years, crosses religious borders, resonates in mystical circles, and resurfaces wherever seekers pursue the confines of memory. Was Enoch's city of light only a dream, or a real place that was glimpsed briefly, lost quickly, and now flickers on the threshold between myth and memory? Let's continue. Some cities may fall, but others simply disappear from sight from the resplendent temples of the kingdom of Enoch, where light was the language and knowledge was the flame. We descend now to something darker, less ethereal, and more primitive. A lineage that coils in the roots of myth, winding silently beneath the surface of ancient belief systems. We enter the domain of the children of the serpent. Somewhere deep in the Sudan desert, long before the pyramids and written history, a series of carved stones lie half-buried in the sand. They represent figures with elongated limbs, fixed eyes, and most curiously, serpent headdresses, not stylized symbols, but sculpted faces with subtle scales, forked tongues, and serpentine crowns. Who are these beings? Priests, kings, or something more? These images are not isolated. In cultures from Mesoamerica to Mesopotamia, serpent worship does not appear as an anomaly, but as a pattern. The feathered serpent of the Mayans, the Nagas of India, the urea cobra that adorned the forehead of the Egyptian pharaohs, the rainbow serpent of the Aboriginal tradition. Even the Bible begins with a serpent, not only as tempter, but as the first to speak. But the serpent's children are more than iconography. In esoteric traditions, they are spoken of as a priesthood before the flood, a lineage perhaps not entirely human that claimed possession of forbidden knowledge, astronomy, healing, metallurgy, and even genetic manipulation. It is said that they did not govern through war or wealth, but through wisdom and also fear. Could these be the same beings spoken of in the book of Enoch, the watchers who descended to earth and taught humanity heaven's secrets? Or do they belong to an even more ancient order? In some traditions, it was believed that the children of the serpent descended from an ancient figure called Sadiel, or in other texts, Samayaza, one of the fallen watchers. Their symbol was not simply a serpent, but the double serpent, a twisted duality of creation and destruction, echoing the helix of DNA long before science discovered it. What is especially strange is how often these symbols predate the civilizations to which we associate them. In the ancient city of Eridu, considered by the Sumerians as the first city, the temple of Enki, god of water and wisdom, contained some of the earliest serpentine motifs in human history. However, layers found beneath that temple suggest an even older structure, swallowed by mud and time. Were the children of the serpent the builders of these lost foundations? Conventional archaeology is cautious. Serpents, they argue, are universal animals, present in all environments, often feared, often venerated. Their presence in mythology is, therefore, the product of a psychological archetype, not a literal lineage. But this explanation, although reasonable, cannot explain the depth of the reverence, nor the consistency of the serpent's role as a bearer of knowledge. In Egypt, the goddess Wadjet, represented as a cobra, was the protector of Lower Egypt and the divine Eye of Ra. Her image was placed on crowns, temples, and tombs. In Gnostic texts, the serpent is not evil, but the emancipator, the one who opens the eyes of Adam and Eve. In Hindu texts, the Kundalini, the serpent coiled at the base of the spine, is the source of divine awakening. Why does the serpent so often represent knowledge, and not only knowledge, but dangerous knowledge? In America, it was rumored that the priests of Quetzalcoatl performed strange rites, rituals of transformation, according to some, in which men became gods. In some oral traditions of Native Americans, serpent men are described as tall, luminous, and cold to the touch. Beings who lived underground and only emerged to guide or to warn. Were these stories pure invention or echoes of something lost? Some fringe theorists have gone further, proposing that the children of the serpent were not a metaphorical priesthood, but a distinct race or species, possibly interbred with early humans. They point to anomalies, elongated skulls found from Paracas to Anatolia, remains of advanced metallurgy in strata prior to the Bronze Age, and genetic markers that defy current classification. Even Plato, in his dialogues, refers to divine men who once guided humanity before the flood and who were later demonized or forgotten. But perhaps the most disturbing trace of the children is not found in temples or texts, but in silence. Many ancient traditions speak of a deliberate erasure, of an era in which certain symbols and names were forbidden, destroyed, or buried. In Egypt, Akhenaten's sudden worship of a single serpent god was quickly erased after his death. In Israel, the bronze serpent Nehushtan was destroyed by King Hezekiah for being too powerful and revered. In the Mayan world, the scribes who recorded the return of the feathered serpent were exterminated in the fires of conquest. Why so much fear? What secret were the children believed to be protecting? Some say it was the memory of what was before the flood, the age of the Watchers, of the mixed-race kings, of a wisdom that humanity should never have possessed. Others believe that the children still exist, not in physical form, but in symbols, rituals, and secret orders that trace their roots to forgotten times. Their legacy is hidden in plain sight. The medical symbol of the caduceus, with its two intertwined serpents. The staff of Moses that turned into a serpent. The Ouroboros, the serpent that devours its own tail, a symbol of eternity and hidden cycles. The double helix in each strand of DNA. Were these symbols chosen or inherited? As we follow the winding path of the serpent through ancient myths and ruins, we are left with more questions than answers. Were the children of the serpent real? If so, who were they? Messengers, teachers, or simply mirrors reflecting our own hunger for knowledge and our fear of what it costs? The serpent sleeps, but is never far from the roots of our history. And as we delve into the shadows of the pre-flood era, one wonders what else lies coiled beneath the surface, waiting. As the legends of the serpent lineages fade into the shadowy ground of forgotten time, we look up at the stars, at a small cluster of bluish lights that have inspired awe on every continent for thousands of years. The ancients gave them many names: the Seven Sisters, the Net, the Doves. But in mysterious traditions, they are known simply as the Pleiades. Nestled in the constellation Taurus, the star cluster of the Pleiades is located only 444 light-years from Earth, close by cosmic standards, but infinitely far in historical memory. For millennia, cultures around the world have pointed to the sky and spoken of these stars not only as distant suns, but as home, as origin, as something sacred. Why? To the naked eye, the Pleiades appear as nothing more than a group of scattered stars. But as we delve into the world's oldest myths and symbols, a subtle, consistent, and strangely global pattern begins to emerge. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs believed that the world would end if the Pleiades did not rise. Their calendar aligned with their movement. In Japan, they are called Subaru and symbolize a family of celestial beings. In the traditions of the Maui, the Pleiades marked the beginning of the new year and were believed to house the ancestors who watched from above. The Dogon of Mali, famous for their inexplicable knowledge of Sirius and its invisible companion stars, claimed that their wisdom came from beings who descended from the Pleiades long before written history began. In North America, the Lakota, the Cherokee, and the Hopi speak of a star people, beings of light who came from the Seven Sisters. Some traditions say that they taught the first humans the rhythms of agriculture, the cycles of the earth. Others hint at a more complex relationship. Visitors who crossed paths, who guided, and who sometimes withdrew. Why do these unconnected cultures share the same point of origin? Conventional astronomy recognizes the importance of the Pleiades in the night sky and their significance in calendars based on agriculture. The cluster rises just before dawn during planting seasons, making it a reliable clock for primitive societies. But this practical function does not explain the spiritual reverence or the stories of visitors, guardians, and teachers descending from this star system. In the high plateaus of the Andes, there are petroglyphs that appear to show 7 points arranged exactly like the Pleiades, next to humanoid figures with large eyes, strange helmets, and elongated limbs. The Incas believed that their ancestors came from the stars, and, in some stories, the Pleiades were considered a gateway between worlds. The Caetanos even synchronized important ceremonies with the helical elevation of the cluster, marking what they called the time of return. In ancient Egypt, the 7 Hathors, mysterious female deities, were associated with destiny, music, and the underworld. Often depicted together as a group, some scholars argue that they are a symbolic reflection of the Pleiades themselves, the celestial sisters who guide the soul through its cosmic journey. Were these symbols of the human psyche or memories of something else? According to marginal historians and esoteric traditions, the Pleiadian colonies were not metaphorical. They were physical and terrestrial. It is said that these civilizations settled in the deep world before the flood, at a time when the Earth was more energetically open and celestial migration was not only possible, but had a purpose. Some of these traditions suggest that the colonies were not built only to observe humanity, but to elevate, teach, and intervene. Legends describe crystalline cities hidden in the lush highlands of what is now South America, and others buried under the sands of North Africa. They speak of floating monoliths, light-based technologies, and a people of radiant appearance, often depicted with soft, pale features and an almost calm presence. Non-conquering, but balanced, beings with intentions. And yet, if they existed, where did they go? Some say they disappeared during the Great Flood, swept back to their star system after the fall of the Watchers and the change in vibration of the Earth. Others believe that they retreated to sanctuaries in the interior of the Earth, possibly in line with the legends of Agartha, Shambhala, or even the mythical Hyperborea. Conventional science is skeptical, understandably. There is no direct evidence of extraterrestrial colonization or historical texts that clearly link the Pleiades with ancient visitors. But even skeptics are intrigued by the astronomical sophistication of early civilizations, how they mapped not only the planets, but also the stars invisible to the naked eye, how they built structures that aligned not only with the sun or the moon, but with constellations like the Pleiades over thousands of years. Could this knowledge have been inherited from a lost lineage? The question deepens when we examine the work of visionaries such as Helena Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner, and Barbara Marciniak, who, separated by centuries, claim to have received knowledge from Pleiadian intelligences. Although their messages vary, they echo each other in strange ways. A call to remember an ancient past, to awaken a forgotten relationship with the stars. Was this simply a spiritual metaphor or a fragmented memory? In today's world, encounters with the Pleiadians continue to be reported, not in temples, but in dreams, visions, and so-called contact experiences. Often peaceful, sometimes overwhelming, these stories describe the same characteristics: light, harmony, advanced intelligence, and a sense of urgent return. Are these the echoes of pre-flood colonies, of a bond that was broken but not severed? We do not know, but the stars remain. The Pleiades continue to rise over sacred places, continue to blink in the minds of seekers and shamans, continue inviting us to look up and ask ourselves not what it is, but what it was. And as we find ourselves on the edge of ancient memory and cosmic possibility, a question whispers like wind through forgotten stone. What if Earth was never alone? As the light of the Pleiades fades in the southern sky, we descend both geographically and in time to the rugged highlands of southern Africa. Here, on a remote ridge near the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe, lies a circle of standing stones, eroded by wind and silence. Few passers-by would pay attention to it. However, it may be one of the oldest megalithic structures on Earth. Locals call it Inzalo Yalanga, the place where the sun is born. But for researchers and alternative historians, it has another name loaded with symbolism: Adam's calendar. At first glance, Adam's calendar looks like a simple circle of stones. Monoliths of rough dolerite protrude from the top of a hill covered with scrub, placed with what appears to be intentional symmetry. But when archaeologists and independent researchers began studying its layout, something unusual emerged. The stones are aligned with the cardinal directions. Two taller monoliths mark the sunrise and sunset at the solstices. Some claim that the shadows cast by these stones form a rudimentary solar calendar, which could serve to count not only days, but also seasons. But what makes Adam's calendar so disturbing and provocative is not only its function, but its age. Conservative estimates based on erosion patterns and soil accumulation suggest that the structure could be 25,000 years old. Others push the date even further, beyond 75,000 years. If true, it would predate the pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, and even Göbekli Tepe. Far from being a footnote to local heritage, this circle of stones could represent a lost chapter of human or pre-human history. Who were the people capable of building such a structure in such a remote era? Conventional archaeology remains cautious. Many scholars believe that the site is a cattle pen or ceremonial circle from the Iron Age. There are no inscriptions, tools, or bones to suggest an advanced civilization. However, others argue that the absence of typical archaeological remains is precisely what makes it curious. The stones, some of which weigh several tons, appear to have been transported from kilometers away without wheels, animals, or a trace of roads or quarries. Michael Tellinger, a South African researcher and advocate of theories about ancient civilizations, suggests that Adam's calendar may have been the central core of a huge network of stone ruins scattered throughout southern Africa. Aerial photographs reveal thousands of circular structures covering vast expanses of land connected by what appear to be ancient roads or energy channels. Some believe that these formations extend over more than 500,000 square kilometers. Are these mere remains of ancient tribal settlements or fragments of a forgotten empire? According to Zulu oral tradition, the region was once ruled by a race of celestial beings known as the Abantu Abakulu, the Great Ones. They were described as tall, light-skinned, and capable of feats that surpassed human understanding. They came from the stars, brought knowledge of gold, astronomy, and sound, and eventually disappeared after a great catastrophe. Could the builders of Adam's calendar have been part of this mythical lineage? Some researchers have observed a disturbing detail. The stone in the center of the circle is not only aligned with the sun, but also has magnetic anomalies. Compasses behave erratically near it. Others have found high levels of polar electric quartz in the stones themselves, suggesting a possible energy function. Was this calendar simply a solar tracker? Or something more, an astronomical observatory, a healing center, or a device attuned to natural energy networks long lost to modern science? There are also tempting symbolic parallels. In many ancient myths, the first man, whether Adam, Adamu, or Adam, is created in the land of the south, near rivers and mountains. In the Sumerian tradition, the domain of the god Enki, Abzu, the aquatic depths, is far from Mesopotamia, possibly in Africa. Some have even linked the site to Zecharia Sitchin's theories about the Anunnaki and their obsession with gold mining in this region. These stories, although widely rejected by academics, share a curious coherence. The idea that humanity, or something like it, was shaped by external forces and that those forces left traces. In that sense, Adam's calendar becomes more than just a pile of stones. It becomes a marker, a border between the known and unknown. Could this lonely ruin on top of a hill be the last remaining monument of an ancient world? A world in which knowledge of the heavens was engraved in stone long before agriculture, metallurgy, or writing. And if such a world ever existed, what brought it to an end? Legends about floods abound in African oral traditions, just as in all corners of the world. Some tell of great rains that swallowed entire cities. Others tell of fire fallen from the sky, or an epoch when the stars fell to earth. Could Adam's calendar have survived such an event? And what stories would its builders have passed down? Would they have survived? Perhaps we will never know. The stones remain silent. The wind reveals no secret. And yet, when tracing the alignments, studying the patterns of the terrain, listening to the stories that the elders of the tribe still whisper, one cannot help wondering, was this hill at some point a sacred place, a celestial clock, a place where the skies met the earth? Or was it something completely different, something far more ancient and terrifying than we are prepared to remember? Leaving behind the stones worn by the son of Adam's calendar, the path does not take us towards stone monuments, but towards whispers in the genealogies of ancient texts, hidden not in the landscape, but in names transmitted, redacted, or lost. Among these shadows, a name is repeated with strange consistency. Sariah, a name that appears in the biblical scrolls, the priestly records, and oral traditions, always on the margin of the narration, and perhaps pointing to something much more ancient than it seems. Who are the tribes of Sariah? For most scholars, Sariah is simply a name of Hebrew origin that means Yahweh has prevailed. Several men appear with this name in the Bible: a high priest, a scribe, a prince of Judah. But some researchers maintain that these appearances are echoes, fragments of something deeper, something prior to the scriptures, a name that in its day could have referred not to a person, but to a people that disappeared long before the ink of the parchments dried. We begin in the highlands of northern Mesopotamia, near the ancient crossroads between Assyria and Anatolia. In these rugged hills and eroded valleys, strange petroglyphs mark the cliffs, symbols that do not correspond with Sumerian or Akkadian engravings, spiral patterns, figures with horns, suns, and stylized half-moons, and in the center of many of them, an abstract glyph that is often interpreted as a tree or a branched river, but that in some circles is believed to represent a lineage, the lineage of Sariah. According to speculative traditions, the tribes of Sarah were a priestly caste, not necessarily in the religious sense that we understand nowadays, but as custodians of the knowledge, of the language, of the astronomical cycles, and possibly of something even more jealously guarded: the memory. The oral legends among the Assyrian Christians speak of an ancient group of watchmen, guardians that preserve the song of the world in a language more ancient than Aramaic. Some versions suggest that these people could interpret the celestial signs, that they can serve in knowledge transmitted before the flood, a knowledge that was not destined to the war or to the domain, but to the balance, to the timing. Was Sariah a priest, or the title of someone who knew when to act, when to speak, and when to hide? Official history does not offer a clear consensus. But the strange thing is that the name of Sariah appears at curious moments: in the fall of the first temple, in the exile to Babylon, and again in the lineage of Esdras. It is as if the name returned, always linked to collapse and transmission, to the passage of something from one world to another. Could this pattern point to something more ancient? Could Syria have been a tribe that existed before the waters of the flood arrived, much before the history began as we know it? Alternative researchers point out that some apocryphal writings, especially those filtered through the Enochian and Essenian lenses, mention tribes of the East that preserved the pure breath of the Adamic language. It was said that these tribes lived apart in valleys protected by high mountains. They were not kings. They were not warriors, but scribes, witnesses, and sometimes midwives of destiny. A text of the 12th century found in Aleppo speaks of a clan of scribes without a city that moved following the stars and carried with them a relic known only as the Tablet of Breath. The passage is vague, perhaps poetic, but intriguing. What is a tablet of breath? A metaphor of oral tradition, a lost technology, or a coded reference to something more literal? Those who follow marginal lines of investigation suggest that the Sariah tribes could be descendants or perhaps remnants of a civilization destroyed not only by water, but by erasure, by deliberate silence. Their task, according to some, was to sow fragments of forgotten knowledge in different cultures. A word here, a symbol there, to leave footprints, not monuments, to write in people, not in stone. If that were true, it would explain their invisibility. It would also suggest that the Sariah tribes were not terrifying in the conventional sense. There are no myths of war machines, nor tales of conquests or divine punishments. Their power, if they had it, resided in what they remembered and in what they refused to reveal. And perhaps that is what makes them so disturbing. Because in a world of collapsing towers and roaring floods, of gods that fight in the sky and cities that drown under mud and ashes, the idea of a silent observer, a tribe that does not intervene, only registers, seems strange, even inhuman. Who writes the history of the flood? Who chooses what survives? Could the Soraya tribes have been the first guardians of what we today call sacred history? Or did they guard something completely different? Something so deeply buried in time that only symbols and names remain. In the south of Turkey, near the ruins of ancient Harran, local legends speak of a hidden town that only emerges during eclipses to offer warnings or guidance. They came wrapped in robes, never spoke directly, and vanished before the moon rose again. Among them, there was always one who carried the mark of the tree and flame, the ink and the fire, the memory and the judgment. We do not know what became of the Sarah tribes, or if they even existed, but the name endures, not strongly, not often, just enough to seem intentional. And so we are left in silence, a silence that observes, records, and refuses to explain itself. So, who were these people? Custodians of ancient codes, witnesses to the first catastrophe, or simply a name repeated throughout time, each time stranger with the passage of centuries? Like a ghostly mark on human history, the Sarah tribes invite us to look again, not at what is written, but at what was meant to be forgotten. What if memory itself was their monument? What if, hidden among stone circles, submerged calendars, and forgotten genealogies, they're still here, observing, waiting for the last echoes of the Sarah tribes to fade into the silence of forgotten mountains and half-erased parchments? Our attention shifts not to a name, but to a pattern, a shape carved in stone that repeats in sacred geometry and is whispered through civilizations that never knew each other, but somehow drew the same symbol. The circle, but not just any circle. In ancient alchemy texts, in forbidden grimoires hidden in corners of Renaissance Europe, and even in dark Egyptian papyri, reference is made to a symbol known as the emerald circle, a closed, vibrant, and uninterrupted loop, often drawn in green ink. Its presence is never quite explained, only hinted at. It appears next to transmutation diagrams, next to descriptions of divine architecture, and sometimes next to maps that do not correspond with our world. Where does this symbol originate? And what could it mean? Some believe that the emerald circle does not refer to a geometric concept, but to a people, a hidden group, perhaps a civilization before the flood, defined not by their empire, but by their function. A circle of guardians, builders, observers. Our search begins in the heart of the Sahara Desert, where something unexpected lies beneath the sand near the coast of Mauritania. Satellite images reveal a huge geological formation. The Rikat structure, often called the Eye of the Sahara. Concentric rings that stretch for kilometers, barely visible to the human eye from the ground, but unmistakable from above. Geologists claim that it is a natural dome formed by erosion over millions of years, but others have observed strange symmetries in its arrangement, alignments, and proportions. To some, it resembles a plan, and, curiously, it mirrors a description found in ancient Greek accounts of Atlantis, a city formed by alternating rings of land and water, protected, ordered, and sacred. Is this a coincidence? Perhaps, but these formations, ringed and massive, seem to repeat throughout the world, on the Bolivian highlands, in the interior of Australia, under the forests of southern India. Diffuse contours, perfect circles, too large to be fortresses, too symmetrical to be tribal camps, and always ancient, too ancient. What civilization could have created these shapes? And why would they do so? In the texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a semi-mythical figure of the Hermetic tradition, there's a passage that speaks of the green light of knowledge surrounded by the breath of gods. Many believe that this is a metaphor, a reference to the philosopher's stone or divine wisdom. But what if it were not? What if the Emerald Circle was something literal? Fragments of emerald have been discovered in unusual archaeological contexts, embedded in Neolithic tools, melted inside collapsed structures in Central Asia, and even buried deep in the subglacial ice cores of Greenland, where emeralds should not exist. These fragments, sometimes cut, sometimes raw, show signs of exposure to extreme pressure and heat. But the most disconcerting thing is the engravings, symbols, and spirals, some of which resemble characters found in undecipherable scripts such as Linear A or the Vinca symbols. Coincidence? Pattern. Among fringe historians, there is the idea that the Emerald Circle was not a place or object, but a network, a pre-Diluvian confederation of guardians of knowledge who codified their knowledge not in books, but in stone and symbols. Their work was subtle, not monuments, but alignments, not statues, but harmonies. They built thinking about energy, about resonance, and about memory. And what were they so afraid of? That question looms over every whisper of the Emerald Circle. Because wherever these alleged sites are found, they carry traces of abrupt endings, heat damage, layers of ash, and tsunami sediments where the sea should not have reached. Signs of sudden silence. It is as if these circles were not destined only to store knowledge, but to protect it, to shield it from something we have forgotten. Even the name emerald carries weight. In the Islamic tradition, paradise is said to be paved with emeralds. In medieval alchemy, it symbolized rebirth. And in Mesoamerican cultures, green stones were believed to house the breath of gods. Why do cultures so separated by time and ocean venerate the same stone? Why the same geometry? In the Sumerian city of Eridu, considered by many to be the first city in history, some tablets speak of a council of 9 people who arrived wrapped in emerald light. They were not kings. They did not govern. They advised. They disappeared. Who were they? Skeptics will point to the creation of myths, to the human tendency to impose patterns on chaos. Circles are simple. Emerald is rare and beautiful. And yet, why do these elements keep appearing where history is scarce? In Peru, a recently unearthed chamber beneath a ruined temple revealed a mural of a circle surrounded by concentric snakes, faded but intact, all painted in green. Its location was deliberate, on the site's lowest level, beneath centuries of construction, hidden beneath layers of older walls. It was not a symbol for the public, but for someone who already knew. Could the Emerald Circle have been real? A code transmitted through centuries? A brotherhood of memory that survived man's first fall? Perhaps we will never know, because every time we get close to deciphering its presence, the trail goes into myth, numbers, dreams. The Emerald Circle does not declare itself. It suggests it refracts. And perhaps that is its purpose. Because the most dangerous truth is the one that is wrapped in beauty, the one that is overlooked because it is familiar, safe. But what if it was never meant to be found, only remembered? What if it does not wait in ruins or texts, but in the echo of a form, a circle, closed, complete, enduring? As the echoes of the Emerald Circle fade into geometry and green light, we now shift eastward to a land where myth and memory are often indistinguishable, a land where rivers meander like snakes through plains laden with the breath of the monsoon, and where ancient stones still seem to hum in a language we no longer speak. Northern India, but not the India we know, not the Vedic hymns, nor the epics written in remote times. Before that, long before, there may have been something else. Hidden beneath layers of cultural sediment, obscured by the weight of scripture and the erosion of memory, lies the half-silent story of what some call the Rama Empire. Not just a kingdom, but a vast, advanced, possibly global civilization. The name comes to us vividly through ancient Hindu epics such as the Ramayana, where Rama is described as a prince, a warrior, a divine being. But was it also the memory of a forgotten era, the symbol of a people, a dynasty erased by time and floods? Throughout the Indian subcontinent, ruins emerge in unexpected places. Megalithic stone temples in southern India, whose foundations seem older than their inscriptions. Remains of cities, such as the submerged ruins off the coast of Dwara, which baffle archaeologists with their depth and precision. Artifacts extracted from the bed of the Sarasvati, a river that no longer flows, but once fed an entire ecosystem of cities now lost under the sand. The most prominent scholars speak of the Indus Valley Civilization. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Delivera, a marvel of the Bronze Age, advanced in urban planning, sanitation, and commerce. But what lies beneath those ruins? In some places, ground-penetrating radar has revealed even deeper, older structures not aligned with the Indus grid system, built with heavier stones and oriented not towards the rivers, but to the stars. What peoples lived even before the Harappans? What language did they speak? And why is there no record of them, except perhaps in legend? The Ramayana and the Mahabharata, although written centuries later, describe technology and war of astonishing proportions. Flying machines called vimanas, weapons of fire and light, cities in the sky, and terrible wars leaving scars on the earth. The descriptions are poetic, yes, but they are also specific, detailing propulsion systems, aerial battles, and even the after-effects of what some have interpreted as nuclear devastation. In Mohenjo-daro, a mysterious layer of molten green glass was discovered, similar to vitrified earth. These phenomena are rare in nature, only appearing in a few places on Earth, including modern nuclear test sites. Could that be a coincidence? Could it be a trick of volcanic pressure? Or is it proof of something more disturbing? Some researchers point to the descriptions of the Mahabharata of a weapon similar to a column of smoke and fire as bright as 1,000 suns that blinded the warriors and made the birds fall from the sky. For others, this sounds disturbingly like a nuclear explosion. However, these words were written, or at least preserved, millennia before such weapons were conceivable. Is it possible that the Rama Empire, if it existed, mastered forms of energy we no longer understand? Or is it simply a myth misinterpreted through a modern lens? And if it is a myth, why do similar stories appear in so many cultures? In ancient Mesopotamian texts, in Central American codices, in Nordic epics, there is talk of bright cities, devastating wars between gods, weapons too powerful for man. Could they all be fragments of the same memory? Could the Rama Empire be a piece of a global puzzle? A civilization that arose before 10,000 BC. BC, before the Ice Age ended, before the flood that so many traditions mention as a reset. There is also the question of Anagas, serpentine beings said to live underground or under rivers, often associated with the ancient kings of India. In some versions, the Nagas ruled before or alongside humans, and were architects, engineers, and builders of great cities in time immemorial. Are they a metaphor, an allegory of another species, or the memory of something we have decided to forget? The ancient Indian city of Vijayanagara, although built in more recent times, stands on upper layers of older ruins. Its architects once spoke of building on the bones of the Rama Empire, but those bones have never been conclusively dated. They belong to an architecture that seems out of place. Enormous stone beams, interlocking foundations, and mathematical proportions also found in the Angkor Wat and even, curiously, in the temples of Teotihuacan. What was this knowledge that seemed to transcend continents? Who were the guardians of this geometry? Even now, the Indian government restricts access to certain archaeological sites, especially those submerged along the Gulf of Cat, where sonar scanners have revealed networks of stone structures lost undersea. Skeptics point to natural formations, but sonar maps show rectilinear designs, roads, and what could be stepped wells or ziggurats. According to some interpretations, these cities date back more than 9,000 years. If confirmed, they would rewrite history completely. But confirmation remains elusive. Perhaps the truth of the Rama Empire is not found in the stone, but in the rhythm, in the mantras that repeat codes, in the stories that disguise records, in the rituals that may once have encoded science. If the ancients hid their knowledge from the passage of time, perhaps they did not do so by burying it, but by making it sacred, protected not by secrecy, but by reverence. Could the Rama Empire have been one of the first great experiments of civilization on Earth? A beacon of art, energy, and order in an era before history dared remember? Or is it simply a mirror that shows us not what was, but what we wish it had been? In the silence of the deepest temples of India, in the murmur of rituals transmitted over millennia, the memory of Rama persists, and we wonder what remains of the world that existed before the Vedas and why it disappeared. And while the echoes of the Rama Empire still resonate in the ancient land of India, through half-buried ruins and half-understood writings, we now turn to much older, much more elusive whispers. To the Pacific, to a chain of legends scattered throughout the islands of Oceania, to symbols engraved on the volcanic cliffs of Micronesia, and to a name that floats like a shadow on the threshold of forbidden memory, the Inal Brotherhood. We do not know where its temple was. We do not know what language they spoke. And yet, traces were left. According to esoteric texts and marginal records that most academic circles avoid, the Nal were guardians of knowledge too vast for the world that followed. They were said to be the priests and scientists of the ancient continent of Mu, a landmass that, if it existed, stretched across the Pacific Ocean, connecting Asia with America through a now-lost civilization of terrifying intelligence and spiritual power. It is not a name that arises only from folklore. The concept of Mu first entered Western consciousness through the work of Augustus Lellenjohn and, later, of James Church, a British colonel-turned-occult historian who claimed to have translated some ancient tablets from India and Tibet. According to him, these tablets described a vanished priesthood, the Nakul, guardians of the sacred, builders of cities lost in the ocean, survivors of cataclysm. Skeptics dismiss Church's claims as fantasies, since, according to them, there is no geological evidence for the existence of Mu. There is no continental shelf under the Pacific that could support such a large landmass. However, oral stories from Polynesia to South America tell of a homeland that sank beneath the waves. The Hopi speak of Cascara. The Hawaiians speak of Kane Hinimoku, the Maui of Hawaii. And in each version, there are wise and luminous people who possessed knowledge of the stars, energy, and consciousness itself. Were these the Nal? Some researchers point to Nanmadol, the enigmatic stone city off the coast of Pohnpei, as a surviving outpost, built on coral reefs with huge basalt columns transported from distant shores. Nanmadol defies any simple explanation. There are no cranes, no wheels, and no iron tools. And yet, more than 250 million tons of stone were placed with almost perfect symmetry, forming a labyrinth of canals and sanctuaries that, it is said, once housed high priests. Could Nanmadol have been a ceremonial place for the Nakul, a fragment of a much vaster structure long since claimed by the sea? Further south, in the Marquesas Islands, researchers have discovered petroglyphs that appear to echo symbols found in both ancient Indus Valley tablets and pre-Columbian ruins of Peru. Could these shared motifs suggest cultural transmission across the oceans? Or do they point to something more unified, a lost matrix of civilization whose memory survives only in sacred geometry and coded myths? According to Church's claims, the Nake's Brotherhood operated as a spiritual caste, preserving advanced knowledge inherited from older eras. Their teachings were not written in alphabets, but in ideograms, geometric shapes, and light-based codes. He claimed that his symbols referred to cosmic cycles, planetary alignments, and energy networks spanning the globe, which modern fringe thinkers now call ley lines. Was this merely a metaphor? Or did the Nal possess a way to interact with Earth's magnetic fields? Did they use natural forces that we no longer understand? And what about the catastrophe? All the stories of Mu end in water, in a sudden cataclysm. Some describe an earthquake so powerful that it fractured the seabed. Others speak of a sky in flames that rained for days, followed by a dark tide that swallowed entire cities. Is this myth or memory? The idea of a lost civilization in the Pacific prior to the last ice age is, for most scholars, an unacceptable hypothesis. However, Recent underwater discoveries, such as the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, challenge the idea that advanced stone construction only emerged in the Neolithic. Yonaguni shows carved steps, platforms, and symmetrical walls now submerged under the sea. Is this a natural formation or ruins too old to date? And if they are ruins, who built them? Some researchers propose that the Natial were not a civilization in the traditional sense, but a network, an initiatory order whose members traveled from MW to other lands before the flood. A spiritual diaspora. Their teachings, it was said, formed the basis of the Egyptian mystery schools, Mayan cosmology, and even the Tibetan tradition of the Bon. Not through conquest, but through silent transmission. Are there still echoes of the Natial Brotherhood hidden in temples around the world? In the serpentine mounds of Ohio, in the megalithic observatories of Bolivia, in the star-aligned sanctuaries of Easter Island? Could these have been outposts, messages, marks left for a future they knew would forget? And why the secrecy? According to the most marginal interpretations, the Natsail believed that misused sacred knowledge could destroy worlds. They encoded their wisdom in myths, in architecture, in sounds and vibrations, not to hide it from the unworthy, but to preserve it until humanity was ready. If so, what was the price of their silence? The flood myths that are repeated in almost all ancient traditions suggest that the world was not ready, that something went wrong, that a line was crossed, and that knowledge, like the Brotherhood itself, was buried under time and tides. We are left with fragments, symbols without a key, temples without builders, and a name that persists only on the margins of memory. NAL, like a whisper from the depths of the Pacific. So we ask ourselves, did the Brothers of Light really exist? Did they walk this earth before history began? And if so, what did they leave behind that we have not yet found? And while the whispers of the Knuckle slip silently through the waters of the Pacific, we turn now to the land, to the vast silent steppes of Eurasia, where the stone resonates against the sky, and the bones sometimes speak when the earth shakes. Extending from the Ural Mountains to the high plateaus of Central Asia, a shadow endures on the ground, in forgotten burial mounds, and in the myths of ancient tribes. It is the shadow of giants, a civilization not only metaphorical, but physical, imposing, and real. In dozens of cultures throughout the Eurasian expanse, Slavic, Siena, Iranian, Turkish, Mongolian, there are stories of ancient beings who were not like us. Beings of immense stature, strength, and wisdom. It is said that they ruled in an era before the flood, before human memory could preserve them. Some were called Urka, others Almas. In ancient Russian chronicles, they were known as Vitatsi, a word that was later associated with warriors, but whose oldest meaning suggests something more colossal. Could these giants really have existed? Archaeological records are officially silent, and yet curious anomalies exist. Unusually large bones found in ancient burial mounds and discreetly removed. Huge weapons and tools, too big for normal human use. Megalithic doors in remote mountains carved with precision for figures at least 27 to 36 meters high. In the Caucasus, shepherds still speak softly about the Katskai giants who once moved among the cliffs and left gigantic footprints fossilized in stone. In Siberia, near the Yenis River, there are petroglyphs depicting elongated humanoid forms, with their arms outstretched towards the sky, each several times taller than the smaller human figures engraved next to them. Myth, symbolism, or memory. Conventional archaeologists dismiss these stories as cultural metaphors, representations of strength, ancestral pride, or the gods. But there are researchers who take a more measured and contemplative approach. They point to the astonishing consistency of legends about giants in vast regions with no connection to each other. In Bashiri folklore, giants are described as builders of underground cities to escape a great fire that fell from the sky. In Alai, legends speak of ancient beings who could mold stone with sound and who disappeared after the second glaciation. And then there are the megaliths, scattered throughout the heart of Eurasia. Vast stone structures, the highlands and plateaus. Some are tombs, others observatories. Nobody knows what others are. In the Turgi region, in Kazakhstan, huge stone rings and geometric patterns only visible from the sky stretch across the desert. Who built them? And why were they designed to be seen from the air at a time when humans were not yet flying? Were these the remains of the kingdoms of giants? A particularly interesting site is located in the Shoria Mountains, south of Siberia. A wall of granite megaliths stacked with mechanical precision, some with an estimated weight of 3,000 tons each. Unlike other ancient constructions, this site has no inscriptions, no accompanying artifacts, no signs of typical human activity, only silent and immobile stones, as if they had been hastily abandoned or built for purposes now forgotten. Conventional scientists suggest that they could be natural formations, the result of erosion and tectonic pressure. But others wonder, why do so many of these formations seem to follow symmetrical patterns? Why do some show flat faces and right angles that seem to defy nature? In the Russian Far East, local legends speak of ancient stone kings who taught the first humans to till the land and mark the stars. They say their skin was pale as ice, their eyes silver, and they walked the earth long before the mountains rose. Could these be distorted echoes of a civilization before the flood, built by beings whose scale and understanding surpassed ours? Even in Western Eurasia, indications of the same narrative arise. In Anatolia, the myth of the Ulu Büyüş, or Great Elders, narrates an era in which the earth trembled under the steps of its rulers. In some parts of ancient Sumer and Babylon, the first gods were represented as divine and gigantic beings. The Anunnaki, for example, are sometimes described as beings who descended from the heavens and differed from mortal humans not only spiritually, but also physically. Is it possible, then, that these accounts are not isolated cultural flourishes, but fragmented memories of an era before ours? Could there have been a kingdom that stretched from the snowy fields of northern Russia to the deserts of Turkmenistan, ruled by beings much taller, stronger, and perhaps even more intelligent than we dare to imagine? If so, what happened to them? Was it the flood, the displacement of the Earth's crust, or the decision to disappear and retreat to the mountains? The Earth, the myth, and perhaps most disturbing of all, what if they didn't all leave? There are still rumors in the Pomare Mountains about travelers who disappear after reporting strange figures watching them from the ridges. In the shadowy forests of the Urals, some believe that the giants never died, but simply sleep. And under the ancient kurgans, still unopened, what bones could still lie intact? We affirm nothing with certainty. We only follow patterns from carved stones to whispered stories, from unearthed relics to vanished lineages. And as the wind blows over the desolate plains of Eurasia, stirring the grass on forgotten mounds, we are left with a question older than history. Did kingdoms of giants really exist that ruled this land? And if so, why do we remember them only in fragments?